Welcome to Tales by Imon. Tonight, we begin a journey into the shadows that linger just beneath the concrete skin of our everyday lives. We pull at the thread of a secret buried so deep, the city itself has forgotten it was ever there. This is The Secret Buried Underneath the City. Chapter 1. The Anomaly in Sector Gamma. The city of Ethelberg doesn't sleep, it just blinks. Even at 2 in the morning, the skyline is a jagged electrocardiogram of neon and ambition, a testament to progress that scrapes the clouds. But I've always been more interested in what lies beneath. My name is Dr. Owen Hayes. I'm an architectural historian, which is a polite way of saying I get paid to dig through dusty blueprints and argue with construction foremen about preserving facades. My office, cluttered on the 19th floor of a building that sacrificed character for efficiency, overlooks the newest wound in the city's landscape, the excavation pit for the Apex Tower. For 3 weeks, the Apex project has been my obsession. Not because of the gleaming steel and glass superstructure it promises to be, but because of what the groundwork crews have been fighting. It started with the ground-penetrating radar. GPR is standard procedure before you sink foundations deep enough to tickle the subway lines. The engineers, a pragmatic bunch from K-Tech Dynamics, had shown me the initial scans. Most of the bedrock was solid, predictable schist. But then there was Sector Gamma. It's a void, Owen, Mark Davidson, the project manager, had told me over a grainy video call, his voice tight with impatience. Probably an uncharted utility tunnel from the early 1900s. Or a sinkhole. We'll pump it full of high-density grout and move on. But I wasn't convinced. I was looking at the sonar pulse readings right then. Mark, this isn't a tunnel. The geometry is wrong. It's too symmetrical. And it's deep. Deeper than the old pneumatic transit system. Hayes, he sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. We are $40 million over budget and 3 weeks behind schedule thanks to that freak electrical storm. I don't have time for historical ghost stories. It's a hole. We fill the hole. End of story. He'd hung up. But I couldn't let it go. That's why I was in my office at 2 a.m., surrounded by coffee cups and archival maps that smelled like vanilla and decay. I had the 1888 city plan unfurled across my drafting table, weighed down by calipers and geology texts. Ethelberg in 1888 was a mess of cobblestone, horse-drawn carriages, and fledgling skyscrapers. I traced the grid. Sector Gamma, where the Apex Tower was rising, was nothing. It was listed as the Old Commons, a patch of green that later became a tenement block, then a parking garage, and now a construction pit. Nothing in the official record indicated a structure. I switched to my terminal, pulling up the GPR scans again. The void wasn't just a space, it was an object. The radar waves didn't just disappear, they were absorbed or deflected at angles that suggested complex internal structures. It looked less like a cave and more like a buried cathedral. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Mark wasn't just filling a hole. He was about to pour 1,000,000 tons of concrete onto something history had deliberately erased. I grabbed my hard hat and jacket. The archives were useless. If I was going to find anything, it would be at the site. The night air was cool, carrying the distant smell of the river and hot pretzels. The Apex site was a massive, floodlit canyon carved out of the city block. A skeleton crew was operating the massive pumps, keeping the groundwater at bay. I found Sal Bianchi, the night shift foreman, huddled inside the site trailer, nursing a thermos. Sal was old school. He trusted dirt and rebar, not digital scans. Dr. Hayes. Knew you'd be back, he grunted, not looking up from his safety checklists. Mark ain't gonna like you poking around. I'm not here to stop the work, Sal. I just need to look at the excavation pile from Gamma. The last one. Before the grout trucks arrive at dawn. Sal squinted at me. That pile. Nothing but mud and broken brick. We hit some weirdly hard substrate though. Chewed up 2 drill bits. Stuff was black. Looked like volcanic glass, but shiny. My pulse quickened. Volcanic glass. Sal, the nearest fault line is 500 miles away. This area is sedimentary. Yeah, well, tell that to my drill bits. He gestured with his thumb toward the pit. Knock yourself out. Just stay clear of the east wall. It's weeping heavy tonight. I navigated the plywood ramps down into the pit. The scale of it was oppressive. The noise of the pumps was a dull, rhythmic roar. I was 50 feet below street level. The walls of excavated earth and rock were sheer cliffs, ribbed by the teeth of the diggers. I found the pile Sal mentioned. It was massive, a small mountain of dark, wet earth. And he was right. Mixed in with the usual clay and shattered limestone were fragments of something else. I pulled a high-lumen flashlight from my belt. The beam hit the material, and it didn't just reflect the light, it seemed to drink it. It was basalt, or perhaps obsidian. Smooth, unnaturally dense, and cool to the touch despite the humid air. It had no place here. I moved along the base of the pile, scanning the debris, and then I saw it. It wasn't a fragment. It was a dressed stone. A corner piece, maybe. About the size of a cinder block, but heavier. It was perfectly smooth on two faces, meeting at a precise 90-degree angle. This wasn't a natural formation. This was cut. This was architecture. But the most chilling part was the marking. Etched deep into the black surface was a symbol. It wasn't a mason's mark, not a Roman numeral, not anything I recognized from my studies of colonial or pre-colonial structures. It was a circle, with 3 jagged lines cutting through it, converging at a center point that wasn't quite the center. It was minimalist, severe, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark corner of the pit. As I focused the camera, my phone screen suddenly dissolved into a blizzard of static. What the? I tapped the glass. The static remained, hissing faintly. Then, another sound joined the pumps. It was a vibration. Low, deep, and steady. It wasn't the rumble of a passing subway car or the thrum of the surface-level traffic. This was coming from below me. I froze, listening. The vibration wasn't just in my ears. I felt it in the soles of my boots, resonating up through my legs. It was a thrum, like a colossal, subterranean engine idling. I looked at the black stone in my hand. The etched symbol seemed to pulse in the beam of my flashlight, a dark eye staring back at me from an impossible depth. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. A spray of loose gravel cascaded from the pit wall Sal had warned me about. I scrambled back, dropping the stone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The static on my phone died, plunging me back into the dim glow of the floodlights. I looked down at the earth beneath my feet. The city of Ethelberg felt thin, like a layer of ice over a dark, stirring ocean. Mark Davidson wasn't just filling a hole. He was drilling into a tomb. And I had the terrible feeling that whatever was inside was still awake. Chapter 2. The Impossibility Stone. The vibration stopped. The silence that rushed in to replace it was somehow worse. A thick, heavy vacuum that seemed to pull at my senses. The rhythmic roar of the groundwater pumps was just noise, a thin veneer over the profound, resonant quiet that had come from below. I was breathing hard, my flashlight beam bouncing off the wet clay wall. I looked at my phone. The screen was black. Dead. Not just asleep, the battery had been full. I looked down. The black stone lay half buried in the mud where I dropped it. The strange, 3-line symbol seemed to mock me. My training as a historian screamed at me, preserve the artifact. My animal instinct screamed, get out of the hole. I did both. I snatched the stone, surprised again by its weight and its almost unnatural coldness, and shoved it into the deep pocket of my jacket. It felt like a block of ice against my side. I scrambled up the plywood ramp, my boots slipping on the wet surface. I didn't look back until I reached the rim of the pit, standing next to the chain-link fence that separated the site from the sleeping city. Sal was still in the trailer, backlit by the glow of a small monitor, oblivious. The pit looked exactly as it had 10 minutes ago, a massive, muddy construction site, bathed in the sterile white glare of floodlights. Nothing had changed. Except everything. I could feel the hum in my bones long after the vibration itself had faded. It was like the afterimage of a bright light, a sensory ghost that my mind refused to let go of. I stayed there, shivering slightly, until the first hint of gray light began to poison the dark blue of the night sky. And with the dawn, came the trucks. The first high-density grout truck rumbled onto the site at 5:30 a.m., its massive mixing drum turning lazily. Mark Davidson arrived in his immaculate Ford Raptor right behind it. He stepped out, holding a tablet and already shouting orders. I intercepted him before he could get to the site trailer. Mark, you have to stop. He didn't even look at me. He just held up a hand. Not now, Hayes. I've got 3 mixers scheduled back to back. We're sealing Sector Gamma by noon. Mark, listen to me. I grabbed his arm. He finally stopped, his eyes narrowing with genuine annoyance. You're not just filling a sinkhole. There is a structure down there. A structure, he repeated, his voice flat. Did you find a keep out sign? An old sewer junction. I found this. I pulled the black stone from my pocket. It was still damp, and the symbol was stark against the dark surface. Mark glanced at it. He actually scoffed. A rock. You're stopping a $40 million pour for a rock. It's basalt, or slag from an old foundry. Who cares? Look at the marking, Mark. This is cut. It's dressed stone. And this symbol. It's graffiti, Hayes, he snapped, pulling his arm free. Probably from some kid in the 70s. Now, I'm going to say this once. Your contract here is as a historical consultant. You are to observe and report on artifacts of recognized significance. A weird rock and a bad vibe don't qualify. You are officially impeding progress. Get off my site. But I felt. I don't care what you felt. His face was hard. My GPR shows a void. My job is to fill that void so my tower doesn't fall over. Get out. Two security guards, already alerted by his tone, moved toward me. There was no point. I was an academic. They were men paid to move obstacles. I took a step back, holding up my hands. Fine. But it's on record. You're burying something, Mark. And you're doing it on purpose. His eyes flashed, but he just turned his back on me and pointed toward the pit. Let's go. Get that boom extended. I want mud in the hole in 5. I walked away, the weight of the stone in my pocket feeling heavier than just its physical mass. I stood across the street, by a closed coffee shop, and watched as the long articulated boom of the grout truck swung over Sector Gamma. With a hydraulic hiss, a thick, gray slurry began to pour into the darkness. They were burying it again, sealing it under thousands of tons of concrete. And I was the only person on Earth who knew. I went back to my office, but I couldn't work. The archival maps seemed childish. The blueprints, irrelevant. I placed the black stone on my desk. It sat there, inert, absorbing the fluorescent light of my office. My phone was still dead. I plugged it into a charger. Nothing. Completely fried. Whatever that vibration was, it had emitted an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to kill solid-state electronics. I spent the next 6 hours trying to identify the symbol. I cross-referenced every database I had access to, global sigil archives, petroglyphs of the Americas, known masonry marks from the 18th and 19th centuries, even occult and alchemical indexes. Nothing. It didn't exist. It was an artifact with no history, a symbol with no meaning, made of a rock that shouldn't be there. By 4 in the afternoon, I was exhausted and desperate. I was a historian. My tools were books and maps. This was outside my field. I needed someone whose tools were microscopes and spectrometers. I needed Dr. Eris Thorne. Eris and I had been in graduate school together before our fields diverged. While I went into the past, she went into the deep past, petrology, geology, material science. She was now the head of the geochemistry lab at Ethelberg University, a woman who trusted data and nothing else. She would either laugh me out of her lab or she would have an answer. Her lab was in the new science atrium, a sterile world of white tile, brushed steel, and humming million-dollar machines. She was leaning over a holographic display when I entered, her black hair pulled back in a tight, functional bun. "Owen," she said without turning. "You look like you've been sleeping in a ditch. Please tell me you're not here to ask about the structural integrity of 19th century brick mortar again. I need you to look at something, Eris. Off the record." That made her turn. My tone, probably. I was still wearing the mud-caked boots from the site. I unwrapped the black stone from the cloth, I put it in and set it on her stainless steel counter. She raised an eyebrow. "Okay, it's a rock. Just analyze it, please. Where's it from? What's it made of?" She sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a hard scientist dealing with a theorist. "Owen, it's obviously obsidian. Volcanic glass. Probably from a known deposit in the western states. Someone carved it. A modern artist, maybe. It's a paperweight." "It's not," I said, my voice quiet. "It was buried 50 feet beneath downtown Ethelberg, in a geological stratum that hasn't seen the sun in 2 million years. And it was part of a structure." Her skepticism wavered, just a fraction. She saw I was serious. "And," I added, "it fried my phone. Instantly." She looked from me to the stone. "That's a tall tale. Test it." With a click of her tongue, Eris picked up the stone, using a cloth. "Fine." She carried it over to a machine in the corner, a scanning electron microscope. "I'll do a quick XRF scan. Get a baseline elemental composition. It'll take 20 minutes. Go get a coffee. And a shower." I didn't move. "I'll wait." She rolled her eyes but initiated the scan. We stood in silence, the only sound the low hum of the lab's ventilation. The results began to populate the screen. Eris leaned in, her brow furrowing. "Well, it's not obsidian," she muttered, mostly to herself. "What is it?" "The composition is wrong. It's silicon-based, yes, but the trace elements are. I've never seen this crystalline lattice. It's almost perfectly ordered, like it was engineered, not formed. It's impossibly pure." She ran another test, inputting commands. A new set of data scrolled by. The color drained from her face. "Eris, what is it?" She turned to me, her eyes wide, all traces of amusement gone. "Owen, where exactly did you say you found this?" "Sector Gamma, the Apex site." "Why?" She pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. At a string of data I didn't understand. I ran a radiometric dating scan. Just a quick pass. "And how old is it?" "Roman. Pre-Columbian." Eris looked at the stone, then back at me. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Owen, this stone, the data says this fragment is old. Impossibly old." "How old?" "It's not just older than Ethelberg. It's older than the schist bedrock it was buried in. It's older than the Appalachian Mountains." She swallowed. "According to this reading, this piece of cut, engineered stone is approximately 2.4 billion years old. It has no business existing on this continent. It has no business existing on this planet." Chapter 3. The Man Who Knew Too Much. 2.4 billion. The number hung in the sterile air of the lab, a monolith of impossibility. For a full 10 seconds, I just stared at Eris. She was pale, her usual scientific certainty replaced by a raw, naked shock. "That's not possible," I finally said. The words sounded thin. That's Precambrian. That's single-celled organisms. That's magma and methane." "I know," Eris whispered. She turned from me and went back to the terminal, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. "It's wrong. It has to be contamination. The sample's compromised. Or the sensors miscalibrated." She initiated the scan again. We stood in silence, the only sound the faint, high-pitched whine of the mass spectrometer in the next bay. I looked at the black stone sitting on her counter. It looked no different. A carved piece of dark, shiny rock. A paperweight, as she'd called it. A paperweight from a time before time. The machine beeped. The data streamed onto the screen. Eris didn't say anything. She just slumped against the counter. "It's the same," I said. It wasn't a question. "To the nanosecond," she replied, her voice hollow. 2.4 billion years. Plus or minus a few millennia. And the composition. Owen, it's not just pure. It's void-hardened. What does that mean, void-hardened? It means the crystalline lattice. It's structured in a way that could only be formed in a total vacuum and near absolute zero temperatures. Like deep space. My mind reeled. So it's a meteorite? A piece of an alien, something, that crashed here. "No," she snapped, hitting the counter with her fist. "That's the problem. If it were a meteorite, it would have impact signatures. It would have fusion crust. It would be seared and battered. This is cut. This is dressed. It's a precise, 90-degree angle. This was milled, Owen. It was part of a machine. Or a building." She looked at me, her eyes frantic. "You're telling me that 2.4 billion years ago, when this planet was a barely habitable rock, someone, or something, was building structures underground? With space-age materials?" I held up my hands. "I'm not telling you anything, Eris. I'm asking. And it gets worse." I told her everything. The symmetrical void in Sector Gamma. The vibration. The low, subterranean thrum. The EM pulse that fried my phone. As I spoke, her scientific panic shifted into a different, more primal fear. She walked over to the lab door and looked out into the empty university hallway before closing it and engaging the magnetic lock. "Eris, you said they're filling it," she said, her back to me. "The site. With concrete. They started at dawn. By now, it must be completely sealed." "Good," she said, turning. "Good. Let them seal it. Let them bury it under 1,000 feet of steel and glass." I was stunned. "What? Eris, this is the single greatest discovery in human history. This changes everything." "No, Owen, it ends everything," she hissed. "It breaks it. Don't you understand? This isn't a discovery. It's a grenade. What you're talking about, it's not history. It's an existential threat. A structure, active, beneath the city. A city of 9 million people. What do you think happens if you uncover this? What happens if it objects? She was right. The cold dread that I'd felt in the pit was creeping back, even here in this bright, sterile room. And that's not the worst part, she continued, her voice dropping. People like Mark Davidson, corporations like K-Tech, they don't get to be that powerful by being stupid. You think they don't know? You think their ground-penetrating radar just showed a void? You think it's an accident they're pouring concrete into it at 5 in the morning on a weekend? The blood drained from my face. You think they know. Mark, he knew what he was burying. I think he was burying the evidence. And then you, Dr. Owen Hayes, historical consultant, walk onto his site and take a piece of it. She pointed to the black stone. That thing. It's not an artifact, Owen. It's a murder weapon. It's a motive. People do not get to know this. The world is not allowed to know this. Which means we are not allowed to know this. I picked up the stone, wrapping it in the cloth. Its coldness was absolute. So what do? We just forget. We let them build a skyscraper on top of that. There is no we. Eris went to her terminal and, with a few keystrokes, began purging the data. Eris, no. You can't delete the scan. Watch me. The data dissolved into a string of zeros. She formatted the drive. It was a calibration error, Owen. A sensor ghost. I never saw you. You were never here. That rock is a piece of slag from an old foundry, just like your construction buddy said. Got it. I can't do that. Then you are on your own, she said, her voice cracking. I have a career. I have a life. I am not going to be the scientist who gets found in a river because she saw a rock she wasn't supposed to see. Get out, Owen. And God help you. I left her lab. The university hallway, moments before a simple passage of tile and fluorescent light, now felt like a gauntlet. Every janitor, every student I passed, seemed to be watching me. The weight in my jacket pocket was no longer a clue, it was a burden. Eris was right about one thing. The official channels were worse than useless. They were complicit. Mark Davidson and K-Tech weren't just building a tower. They were acting as groundskeepers, tidying up a secret that was never meant to be disturbed. But they weren't the first. My mind went back to the 1888 map. The old commons. A patch of green. Why? Why was that one spot left undeveloped for so long, even as the city grew violently around it? It wasn't a sinkhole. It was a lid. I couldn't go to the site. I couldn't go to the university. I couldn't go to the police. I had to go to the only person I knew who operated further outside the mainstream than I did. If the official history was a lie, I needed someone who specialized in the lies. Professor Julian Finch. Finch had been a rising star in my own department, architectural history, until his divergence. He became obsessed with what he called subterranean cartography and anomalous architecture. He claimed that major cities, London, Rome, Ethelberg, weren't built on the ground, but were built around pre-existing, non-human structures. He published a paper on the geometric alignment of Masonic lodges and subterranean water lines, and was quietly, brutally, forced into early retirement. He was a conspiracy theorist, a pariah, and he was the only person who might understand the symbol on my stone. Finch lived in the oldest part of the city, the Bricktown district, in an apartment above his cluttered, failing rare bookshop. I took a cab. As I paid the driver and stepped onto the cobblestone street, I felt it. The unmistakable, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I was being watched. I paused, pretending to check my phone, a useless, dead brick. I scanned the street. It was quiet. A few delivery vans. A woman walking her dog. And a black sedan, parked across the street, half a block down. It was idling. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. My heart hammered. Eris's words echoed in my head. People get found in a river. I pulled my jacket tighter and, without looking back, pushed open the tinkling bell door of Finch's Folios. I was in the game now, and I didn't even know the rules. Chapter 4. The Keeper of the Unseen. The bell above the door of Finch's Folios let out a thin, asthmatic jingle. It was the only sound in the shop, which smelled of paper dust, old leather, and something vaguely sweet, like pipe tobacco. My skin was crawling. The black sedan was still out there, a shark idling in the current. I had to force my legs to move, to push myself away from the front window and into the shadows of the shop. Finch's store wasn't just a shop, it was a sarcophagus of forgotten ideas. Books were stacked in precarious leaning towers that reached for the pressed tin ceiling. The aisles were narrow canyons carved through a landscape of paper. Antique maps, framed in dark, warped wood, hung crookedly, showing coastlines that no longer existed in continents labeled, "Here be dragons." "Professor Finch," I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the dusty silence. A rustling sound came from the back, behind a looming shelf labeled Metaphysical Geography. "The shop is closed," a voice rasped. It was dry, like old parchment. "I'm not here to buy anything. I need to talk to you. It's about your work. Your paper on anomalous architecture." The rustling stopped. A moment later, a man emerged from the shadows. Julian Finch was smaller than I'd expected, but his presence was sharp. He was perhaps 60, with a wild mane of silver-gray hair that seemed to defy gravity. He wore a rumpled tweed jacket over a faded cardigan, and a pair of round spectacles were perched precariously on his nose. But it was his eyes that held me. They were bright, inquisitive, and utterly devoid of surprise. "Dr. Owen Hayes," he said. "Not a question." I froze. You know who I am?" "Of course." Finch gestured to a cluttered corner. "I made it my business to know everyone in my old department, especially the ones like you, who had just enough imagination to be interesting, but not quite enough to be ruined. Until today, it seems." He looked past me, toward the front window. "You're the consultant on the Apex Tower project, and you've brought some very uninteresting friends with you." My blood ran cold. "You saw the car, the black sedan, the model with the reinforced body panels and the non-reflective, polarized glass? Hard to miss." He turned away, unimpressed. "They're K-Tech Dynamics. Or rather, the part of K-Tech that doesn't build towers, but ensures no one stops them. I call them the custodians. Now, why have you brought them to my doorstep, Dr. Hayes?" There was no time for subtlety. My carefully planned speech evaporated. "You were right," I said, my voice low and urgent. "About all of it. The subterranean structures. The cover-up." Finch busied himself, straightening a stack of books. "Was I? I wrote many papers. You'll have to be more specific. Sector Gamma, the old commons. It's not a void. It's a structure. And I took something from it." I reached into my jacket. My hand was shaking. I pulled out the cloth-wrapped stone and placed it on a small, clear space on his counter, next to an astrolabe and a human skull. Finch stopped. He didn't look at the stone at first. He looked at me. His bright eyes scanned my face, judging, measuring. Then slowly, he reached out and unwrapped the stone. The moment his fingers touched the black surface, he hissed, a sharp intake of breath. He didn't recoil. He froze. "Where?" he whispered, his eyes locked on the stone. "Did you get this?" 50 feet down. From an excavation pile. "I told you." "No." He looked up at me, his face transformed. The absent-minded professor was gone. This was someone else. Someone sharp and dangerous. "This is not from a structure. This is part of the lock." "The lock? What do you mean? I thought it was a building." "It is a building," Finch snapped, his voice a low, intense growl. "It's a prison. It's a containment cell. It's a cage. And you just took a piece of the door." He was tracing the three-line symbol with his finger, not quite touching it. "I tried to identify this," I said. "I ran it through every database. It doesn't exist." "It exists," Finch said grimly. "Just not in your databases. This is the sigil of the three veils. It's not a decoration. It's a schematic. It's a warning. It means that which sleeps must not wake." He looked back at the window, his jaw tight. "You didn't just stumble onto an old secret, Doctor. You stumbled into an active, ongoing war. The old commons wasn't left empty by accident. It was a quarantine zone. My ancestors, your ancestors, they knew. They didn't have the technology to move it, so they built around it. They founded Ethelberg on top of it as an act of containment." "Who? The Masons? The founders?" "Before them. All of them. And the custodians, K-Tech, they're just the newest face of the organization that has been tasked with keeping that thing quiet. They aren't building a tower, Dr. Hayes. They are reinforcing the cell. The old seals are failing. The old magic, the old compacts, they're wearing thin. I finally understood. The vibration. The EM pulse. It wasn't waking up, was it? No, Finch said, a new terrible fear dawning in his eyes. That was the containment system failing. That was the pulse of the lock itself, trying to reset. And you were at ground zero. With this. He tapped the stone. You've interfered. You've taken a piece of the mechanism. He snatched the stone and shoved it into a lead-lined box under his counter, slamming the lid. They aren't watching you because you saw something. They're hunting you because you stole something. This stone doesn't just belong to the structure, it's connected to it. To them, you're not a whistleblower. You're a saboteur. I looked out the window. The black sedan's door opened. They're coming, Julian, I said, my voice tight. Yes, of course they are. Finch didn't panic. He moved with a swift, sudden purpose that belied his age. He went to an old oversized map of Ethelberg hanging on the wall and pulled it aside, revealing a small, steel-reinforced door. You said you were a historian of architecture, Dr. Hayes. Let's see if you can handle the real architecture of this city. He was turning a complex series of deadbolts. Where does that go? To the Undercity, the old pneumatic transit tubes, the forgotten river channels, the spaces between the spaces. It's the only way we get out of here. He pulled the door open, revealing a dark, descending staircase that smelled of damp earth and ozone. Go, he commanded. Quickly. They won't knock. I hesitated, my mind still reeling from the revelation. A prison. A cosmic cage, buried beneath our feet. From the front of the shop, I heard the sound I had been dreading. The faint, asthmatic jingle of the bell. Someone was inside. Now, Doctor, Finch hissed, shoving me toward the darkness. Welcome to the real history of Ethelberg. Chapter 5. The Veins of the City. Finch didn't have to tell me twice. I plunged into the darkness behind him, my shoulders slamming against the ancient brickwork. The steel door boomed shut behind us, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing like gunshots in the narrow passage. A split second later, the front door of the shop splintered open with a sound like a grenade. Heavy, booted footsteps stormed the store. Shouts. Finch. Containment protocol. Move, Dr. Hayes. Finch's voice was a sharp command in the pitch black. The darkness was total, suffocating. It smelled of ozone, cold rust, and something ancient, the smell of earth that had never seen the sun. My hands were out, scraping against a wall that was slick with cold moisture. I can't see, I hissed, stumbling over uneven flagstones. You don't need to see. You need to run. I heard Finch fumbling ahead of me. A powerful, focused beam of light cut through the gloom. He'd produced a heavy-duty flashlight. Here. He shoved a second one into my hand. I thumbed it on. The beam illuminated a tunnel, not a modern sewer. It was a perfect arch, crafted from Victorian red brick, but the floor was paved with the same impossible, non-reflective black stone from Sector Gamma. This is... I stammered. This is part of it. This is the service corridor, Finch panted, already moving at a brisk, shuffling pace. He was carrying the lead-lined box under one arm. The original city planners, the ones who knew, they built these tunnels to monitor the lock, to maintain the seals. Now, they're just pathways for rats and them. Behind us, a metallic shriek tore through the air, the sound of our steel door being torn from its hinges. They're in, I said, my voice tight. Of course they are. Finch didn't look back. That door was only ever meant to slow them down. They know all the old ways. But I know them better. We ran. Our footsteps splashed in shallow, stagnant puddles. The tunnel twisted, descended. The air grew colder, heavier. My flashlight beam danced over junctions, revealing smaller pipes and tubes branching off, the skeleton of the city's forgotten nervous system. Where are we going? I yelled, my breath clouding in the frigid air. A node, he called back. A junction. A place where the lock's energy signature is shielded by natural bedrock. They are tracking this. He patted the lead box. The stone you took. It's a beacon. It's screaming its location to them. I thought the lead box stopped that. It dampens it, Doctor. It doesn't silence it. Not to their instruments. They're close. As if summoned by his words, a new sound echoed from the tunnels behind us. It wasn't just footsteps. It was a high-frequency, electronic whine. A sound that set my teeth on edge. What is that? They're scanners. They're mapping the tunnels. Triangulating. Faster. Finch ducked into a smaller, circular tunnel. This one was different. It was metal, riveted, and coated in rust. A pneumatic transit tube, I whispered, recognizing it from my research. The 1890s system. It was abandoned. It was never for transit, Finch said, his voice grim. It was part of the containment. A pressure release system. Keep up. We were in a maze. Every turn looked the same. Without Finch, I would have been hopelessly lost in seconds. The high-pitched whine of the scanners was getting closer. It was coming from 2 directions now. They're flanking us, Julian. I know. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the tunnels, amplified, distorted. It was cold, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. Professor Finch, we have you contained. Surrender the artifact. You are interfering with Protocol Gamma. This is your only warning. Finch stopped, leaning against the curved metal wall, his chest heaving. Protocol Gamma, he spat. Fools. Arrogant fools. They think they're in control. What is it, Julian? What is in the lock? I demanded, the adrenaline making my voice shake. You called it a prison. What did they lock up? Finch looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic in the flashlight beam. A name. It has a name. The first people, the ones who laid these stones, they called it the Umbra. The Shadow. It wasn't a creature of flesh. It was a consciousness. A being of cold void energy that was drawn to this planet when it was young. It was a parasite. It fed on the planet's nascent geomagnetic field. It fed on life itself. My stomach turned. And the lock, he said, was a trap. A brilliant, desperate trap. They, the first ones, lured it. They built a resonant, physical cage made of that stone, a material it couldn't phase through. They forced it, pinned it, into a physical form and buried it. And for billions of years, it has slept. Until now, I whispered. The lock is failing, he said, his voice dropping. That vibration you felt, the EM pulse, that was the containment system going into catastrophic failure. K-Tekka's Protocol Gamma, pouring concrete into it. It's like trying to patch a nuclear reactor with duct tape. They're not sealing it, they're agitating it. And the stone. I pointed to the box. It's a key. A fail-safe key, I think. Part of the mechanism itself. It was never meant to be removed. By taking it, you've unbalanced the entire system. The lock it's bleeding, Dr. Hayes. And we're holding the wound. The whining sound was deafening now. Ahead of us, a beam of harsh, blue-white light sliced through the darkness. A dead end. A massive, rusted circular bulkhead blocked the tunnel. We were trapped. Julian, it's blocked, I said, my flashlight finding no other exit. No, he said, it's just old. He rushed to the bulkhead and grabbed a large iron will set in its center, trying to turn it. It's rusted shut. Professor, it is over. I spun around. 2 figures stood at the other end of the tunnel, not 20 yards away. They were in black, tactical armor, their faces obscured by polarized visors that glowed with a faint blue light. They weren't holding guns. They were holding devices that looked like high-tech tuning forks, the source of the terrible whining. Give us the box, Professor, the lead figure commanded. You do not understand the forces you are playing with. I understand them far better than you arrogant jailers. Finch snarled, still pulling uselessly at the rusted wheel. You've forgotten what the prisoner is. The artifact. Now, the figure took a step, raising the device. Finch held the lead box to his chest. He looked at me, his face a mask of grim defeat. They don't know. And then the ground shook. It wasn't the deep thrum from the pit. It was a violent, sickening lurch. Dust and rust rained from the ceiling. A web of cracks splintered across the black stone floor. One of the custodians stumbled, his visor turning to look up the tunnel. His radio crackled to life. Sir, Sector Gamma is destabilizing. The slurry, it's not holding. We have a breach. Get the artifact, the leader yelled, his cold composure finally breaking. But Finch wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the rusted bulkhead in front of us. He lowered his flashlight. Julian, what is it? You fools, Finch whispered, his voice trembling with a new profound terror. It's not Gamma you need to worry about. He pointed. Look, I aimed my beam at the bulkhead. My heart stopped. A thin, black, oily substance was weeping through the seams of the rusted metal. It wasn't water. It wasn't mud. It was moving. The rivulets of black liquid crawled over the steel, defying gravity, pulsing with a faint, internal cold light. The whining from the custodian's devices spiked to a painful shriek. The black ooze converged at the center of the bulkhead, forming a glistening, shifting pool. And from that pool, a single perfect tendril rose, like a striking snake, and hung in the air, looking at us. The Umbra was awake. And it was out. Chapter 6. The Sacrifice at Bulkhead 7. The black tendril hung in the air, a sliver of active nothingness. It was utterly silent. All sounds seemed to have been sucked into it. Even the high-pitched whine of the custodian scanners faltered, warbling like a dying engine. The air temperature in the tunnel plummeted. I could see my breath, a cloud of white vapor in the beam of my flashlight. The cold wasn't normal. It was a hungry, predatory cold that burrowed into my skin. The lead custodian, his tactical composure shattered, took half a step back. His partner raised his tuning fork device, his hand visibly shaking. "Hold position," the leader barked. "Breach is active. Deploy containment field. Priority 1, the asset." He was talking about the stone. He still wanted the stone. His partner fumbled with his device. "Sir, the frequency, it's not locking. The energy readings they're negative." "Just do it." The second custodian aimed his device at the tendril and pressed a stud. A cone of brilliant, shimmering blue light shot out, enveloping the black ooze. For a heart-stopping second, the tendril writhed, trapped in the energy net. And then, with a movement too fast to follow, it struck. It didn't break the blue field. It absorbed it. The cone of light folded in on itself, sucked into the tendril like water down a drain. The custodian's device let out a sound like a circuit breaker popping, and a wisp of smoke curled from its housing. The tendril snapped forward, ignoring Finch and me completely. It was focused on the custodians. It hit the second man, the one with the broken device, in the center of his chest, right over the armored plate. He didn't scream. He didn't explode. He just dimmed. The lights on his tactical suit, the blue glow of his visor, the small red LEDs on his radio, they all flickered and died. He stiffened, his head snapping back, and then collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. His partner caught him, lowering the body to the ground. "Ben!" the leader yelled, his voice cracking with the first human emotion I'd heard from him. "Ben, report." He rolled the man over. I trained my flashlight on him. The man's visor was dark, but through the polarized glass, I could see his face. His eyes were wide open, his skin a pale, waxy gray. He looked empty, drained. The Umbra had fed. The tendril, now slightly thicker, pulsed with a faint, oily iridescence. It drew back, coiling in the air, its head turning to regard the remaining custodian. This was our chance. "Julian, the wheel!" I yelled, throwing my shoulder against the rusted bulkhead. The jolt. It must have broken the rust. Finch didn't need to be told. He threw his entire wiry frame against the iron wheel. With a sound like a dying dinosaur, a shriek of tortured metal that echoed through the tunnels, the wheel moved. It turned 1 inch, then 2. "Behind you!" Finch screamed. I spun. The lead custodian was on his feet. He had dropped his scanner and now held a different weapon. It looked like a short-barreled rifle, but it had no muzzle, only a heavy, crystalline lens. He was aiming it at us. The black tendril struck at him again. The custodian fired. A blast of pure, white-hot light, like a welder's arc, slammed into the Umbra. It wasn't a bullet, it was a continuous, searing beam. The Umbra hissed, a sound like a billion insects, and recoiled, the white light burning and scattering the black ooze. "The door!" Finch roared, heaving on the wheel again. "He's buying us seconds." I turned back and put my hands next to his. We pulled together. The bulkhead groaned, metal scraping on metal. It was opening. A dark, vertical slit of deeper blackness appeared. "Keep it contained, you fool!" Finch yelled over his shoulder at the custodian. "It wants the key." The custodian's head snapped toward us. His beam was holding the Umbra at bay, but just barely. The black mass was already reforming, splitting into 3 tendrils, testing the edges of the light. He was pinned. He couldn't stop us and contain the breach at the same time. He made his choice. "Seal the quadrant," he roared into his radio. "I'm compromised, but I have the asset in sight." He took 1 step toward us, shifting his beam. It was the opening the Umbra needed. One of the new tendrils slipped past the edge of the light and lanced through the air, striking the lead-lined box under Finch's arm. "No!" Finch yelled. The stone didn't just attract it, it reacted. The lead box glowed a dull, sick purple from the inside, the Umbra's energy supercharging the 2 billion-year-old artifact. The tendril latched on, trying to rip the box from Finch's grasp. Finch cried out, not in pain, but in effort, his knuckles white as he held onto the box. "Owen, through the door," he commanded. "I'm not leaving you." I pulled on the box, trying to break the tendril's grip. The moment my glove touched it, a cold so profound it felt like fire shot up my arm, paralyzing me. "You must!" Finch bellowed. He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible final clarity. "It's not just a key, it's a lure. As long as it's separate from the lock, the Umbra will hunt it. You have to take it. You have to get it away from here." "Julian, no." He didn't give me a choice. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he ripped the lead box free from my frozen grip and threw it at me. "Take it!" he screamed. I stumbled back, catching the box against my chest. The contact seared through my jacket. At the same time, Finch used his momentum to shove me backward, through the narrow, dark opening of the bulkhead. I fell through, landing hard on a wet, unseen floor. "Julian!" I scrambled to my feet, turning. I saw a triptych of pure horror. Finch, on his knees, unarmed, between me and the fight. The custodian, his face now visible behind a cracked visor, screaming as 2 Umbra tendrils envelop his light weapon, causing it to overload in a shower of sparks. And the third, largest tendril, ignoring the dying custodian, whipping through the air, no longer interested in the box, but in Finch. "The city!" Finch gasped, looking at me through the gap in the door. "The map, in my pocket. Find the Ethelberg keystone. It's the only." The tendril hit him. He arched back, silent, his body convulsing as the darkness enveloped him. "Julian!" With his last ounce of strength, he reached out, not to me, but to the bulkhead door. He grabbed the handle and pulled. The massive steel door slid shut, the finality of its booming echo a death sentence. I was alone. On the other side of the bulkhead, I heard a catastrophic high-energy explosion, the custodian's weapon overloading, and then a heavy, wet, pervasive silence. I was in absolute darkness. My flashlight had skittered away when I fell. My arm was numb, burning with an unearthly cold, and I was clutching a lead-lined box that was pulsing with a faint, malevolent energy, a beacon in the dark for a monster that was now well and truly free. Chapter 7. The Keystone of Ethelberg. The silence on my side of the bulkhead was absolute. It was a dead, tomb-like quiet, made heavier by the echo of the explosion on the other side. Finch was gone. The word keystone hung in my mind, the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. I was alone, in the total, suffocating darkness. My breath was a ragged roar in my ears. The lead-lined box was clutched to my chest, and the spot where the Umbra had touched my arm was now a spreading, agonizing numbness that felt like 1,000 needles of ice. The box itself was pulsing. A slow, rhythmic thump-thump, like a diseased heart, in time with my own. I had to move. I couldn't honor Finch's sacrifice by dying in the dark. I crawled, my good hand patting the wet, gritty floor. My fingers brushed the cold, metal casing of my flashlight. I had dropped it when Finch shoved me through. I grabbed it, my numb hand fumbling with the switch. Click! A weak, yellow cone of light sliced through the black. It wasn't a tunnel. Not anymore. I was in a cavern. A massive, natural vault of dripping limestone and ancient granite. The ceiling was so high, my light couldn't find it. The air was cold, but it was the clean, damp cold of the deep earth, not the predatory, draining cold of the Umbra. I turned the beam back to the door. Bulkhead 7. It was a circular, steel scar, a man-made intrusion grafted onto the natural rock wall. It was holding, for now, Finch. He was gone. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow. The eccentric, paranoid professor had been right about everything, and he had died for it. His last words, the map in my pocket. My heart stopped. He hadn't meant his pocket. He had grabbed my jacket. In that last, desperate moment, he hadn't just been shoving me to safety. He had been passing me the torch. With my one good hand, I tore at the zipper of my jacket. My numb, frozen fingers were clumsy, useless. I jammed my hand into my inner pocket. It was there. A small packet, wrapped tightly in oilcloth. It was still warm from his body. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. I laid it on the damp cavern floor, my flashlight beam centered on it. It wasn't a modern map. It was old. Vellum, or maybe treated linen, cracked at the folds. It smelled of Finch's shop, paper dust and pipe tobacco. It was a palimpsest. A modern map of Ethelberg, the streets, the river, the boroughs, was lightly inked over a much older, infinitely more complex diagram. This was his subterranean cartography. It showed lines, like ley lines, that flowed beneath the city like a second, hidden river system. They were labeled with names I didn't recognize: the Serpent's Vein, the Old Conduit, the Lock Mechanism. These lines all flowed, converged, and met at a central point. My breath caught in my throat. The central node. It was marked with a familiar, terrifying symbol. The circle with the 3 jagged lines. The sigil of the 3 veils. The mark on the stone. Beside it, written in Finch's spidery, urgent handwriting, were 3 words: the Ethelberg Keystone. I looked closer, using the faint, modern street grid as a reference. The node, the keystone, it wasn't a random point. It wasn't a forgotten intersection. The center of this entire hidden system, the point that Finch believed was the key to something, was the Ethelberg Grand Library. The oldest, largest, and most fortified public building in the city. The sub-archives. I had a destination. A sound, a low thump, vibrated through the rock under my knees. I spun, aiming the light at the bulkhead. Thump. A dent appeared in the center of the steel wheel. A fresh, concave impression. The door was buckling inward. Thump. It was louder. The entire steel door groaned, its rivets straining. The Umbra. It was on the other side, and it was pounding. It knew where I was. It knew I had the stone. The lead box in my hand pulsed in response. It was hot now, the cold numbness in my arm replaced by a burning, searing pain. The Umbra was calling to it. I scrambled to my feet, snatching the map. I looked at the bulkhead. Black, oily rivulets were beginning to weep through the microfractures around the door seal, sizzling and turning to foul-smelling smoke as they hit the air on my side. It wouldn't hold. I had minutes, at best. I swept my flashlight beam across the cavern. This wasn't a dead end. The bulkhead was one entrance, but on the far side of the massive chamber, almost hidden behind a curtain of stalactites, was another opening. A natural tunnel, carved by some long-dead subterranean river. I looked at Finch's map. The tunnel was there, marked as the Old Conduit. It was a path. I gave one last look at the groaning, dented steel door. "I'm sorry, Julian," I whispered. Then I turned my back on the monster and ran, plunging into the unknown, natural darkness, following a map drawn by a dead man, hunting for a secret buried in a library, all while being chased by God. Chapter 8. The Infection. My flashlight beam, weak and flickering, cut a frantic path through the darkness. I was running, stumbling over the uneven floor of the Old Conduit. The cavern was a maze of dripping stalagmites, the path forward only visible on Finch's map. The pounding on the other side of Bulkhead 7 had stopped. This was not a comfort. A part of me, the logical part, knew the Umbra hadn't given up. It wasn't pounding because it was thinking. It was looking for another way. And the part of it that had infected me, the part that was now a searing, icy fire in my left arm, was a beacon for it. Finch was dead. The thought was a repeating, dull blow against my mind. He had sacrificed himself for a map, a lead-lined box, and a man he barely knew. I couldn't let it be for nothing. My flashlight flickered again, the batteries dying. No, not now. I slammed it against my palm. The beam returned, weaker this time. The map. I unfurled it. The path was clear, if insane. The Old Conduit, this natural river cavern, snaked directly underneath the oldest, most foundational part of Ethelberg. Finch's notes showed it rising, climbing, intersecting with the city's man-made skeleton. I had to climb. My left arm was becoming a liability. The numbness had receded, replaced by a unique and terrible cold burn. It was an agony that felt like my entire arm was submerged in dry ice. But it was the box, clutched in my good hand, that truly terrified me. It was still pulsing. Thump, thump. And I could feel an echo of that pulse inside my injured arm. They were connected. The key and the lock. The Umbra and me. I moved for what felt like hours. I waded through chest-deep, frigid water. I scrambled over piles of slick, treacherous rockfall. The path was old. I saw evidence of other travelers. A rusted piton hammered into a crevice. A length of rotted, hemp rope. Finch, or the people before him. The original keepers? Finally, I saw it. Just as the map promised. A perfectly vertical shaft of Victorian brick, ascending into darkness, a series of rusted iron rungs set into its side. It was a ventilation shaft. A way out. I secured the lead box, strapping it to my belt with a grimace. I tested the first rung. It held. The climb was agony. I had to do it almost one-handed. My left arm, the one with the Umbra's touch, was nearly useless. It could grip, but the pain was blinding. Each time I put weight on it, the cold burn flared, and I could feel the infection spread. I felt it trace a path from my hand, up my forearm, past my elbow. It felt like liquid nitrogen being injected into my veins. I climbed, rung after rung. The air grew stale, then, mercifully, fresher. I could smell the city above me. Rain, exhaust, and dumpsters. The most beautiful smell in the world. After a final, desperate heave, my good hand hit something solid and flat. A manhole cover. I braced my feet on the rungs and pushed with my shoulder and my good arm. It was heavier than any manhole cover had a right to be. It was iron, sealed with rust and time. Come on. I grunted, pushing with everything I had. The Umbra was down there. The custodians were up here. I was caught between the abyss and the armor. With a grinding shriek of metal on stone, the cover scraped open, a sliver of dirty, pre-dawn, urban light cutting the blackness. I shoved it aside and hauled myself up, dragging my bad arm and the pulsing lead box with me. I collapsed onto wet cobblestones, gasping, the air of the surface world stinging my lungs. I was in a narrow, trash-filled alleyway. I used my last ounce of strength to pull the heavy iron cover back into place. It settled with a dull, final thud. Sealed. I lay there for a long moment, my cheek pressed against the cold, gritty stone. The sky above was a strip of deep, bruised purple. It was still night. Or rather, that dead, gray hour just before dawn. 5 a.m., maybe. My watch, like my phone, was a dead piece of metal, killed by the EM pulse in the pit. I was out. I was alive. I staggered to my feet, leaning against the cold brick wall. I was covered in mud, filth, and slick, foul-smelling cavern water. I looked like a refugee from another world, which, I realized, I was. And I was hurt. I looked down at my left arm, pushing up the tattered, soaked sleeve of my jacket. The skin, where the Umbra's energy had touched me through the box, was a waxy, dead white. But radiating from that spot, snaking up my arm, were my veins. They were no longer blue. They were a deep, inky, sickening black. They were pulsing, faint and slow, in perfect time with the box strapped to my belt. I wasn't just carrying the artifact. I was becoming one. The Umbra had tagged me. It had put a tracker inside me. Finch's words came back. It's a lure. As long as it's separate from the lock, the Umbra will hunt it. And now, it would hunt me. A sound at the end of the alley. A car engine, too quiet to be a taxi, too smooth to be a civilian. I peeked around the corner of a rusted dumpster. My heart stopped. Blocking the mouth of the alley, gliding to a silent stop under a flickering streetlight, was a black sedan, identical to the one outside Finch's shop. They hadn't just been in the tunnels. They had a perimeter. They were waiting for me. They knew. They knew I would come up. A car door opened. A man in a dark, clean-cut suit stepped out. Not tactical armor. This was a different breed. He looked like an executive. He held a small silver device in his hand. He looked down the alley, not at me, but at the device. It was scanning. He knew I was here. I had no weapon. I had one good arm. I was carrying a 2-billion-year-old cosmic key that was slowly killing me, and I was trapped. I looked at the end of the alley. The custodian was 20 yards away. I looked behind me. A 12-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The man in the suit spoke, his voice calm, conversational, but it carried in the dead air. Dr. Hayes, we know you're in there. We know you have the asset. Professor Finch was a fool, but you are not. You are a man of history. You are a man of reason. He took a step into the alley. The situation is contained, but you are contaminated. We can help you. That infection, it will not stop, Owen. We are the only ones who can. He was offering me a deal. My life, my arm, for the stone. He took another step. Give us the key, Dr. Hayes. Help us put the prisoner back in its cell. And what then? I called out, my voice a ragged rasp. Back to building your tower? The tower is the containment, Doctor, he said patiently, as if explaining to a child. It is the new lock. A marvel of engineering. but it cannot be fully activated without the keystone. My God, they weren't trying to bury it. They were trying to harness it. The man smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. The professor was right about that. The old seals are failing. The new ones require the central component. You have it. He was 10 yards away. I saw his other hand. It was behind his back. Don't come any closer, I yelled, backing up against the chain link fence. We have to, Doctor. His hand came out. He was holding a pistol, fitted with a long, heavy suppressor. The asset cannot be allowed to move. And neither, I'm afraid, can you. He raised the gun. Last chance. The box. Or your life. The choice is irrelevant, really. We will take both. Chapter 9. The Price of Escape. The man in the suit raised his suppressed pistol, his arm steady, his aim perfect. He was aiming for my head. The asset cannot be allowed to move, he repeated, his voice a calm, flat monotone. His finger tightened on the trigger. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to retrieve. I wasn't a person to him. I was a contaminated asset, a problem to be solved, and the box I carried was the prize. The pistol made a soft, coughing sound. Fat. I didn't wait to see where the bullet went. I threw myself sideways, smashing my shoulder against the cold, wet chain link fence. The bullet sparked on the cobblestone, exactly where my head had been a microsecond before. Asset is non-compliant, the custodian yelled, not at me, but into a small microphone on his cuff. Moving to retrieve. Contain the block. He advanced, his steps measured, bringing the pistol up again for a finishing shot. I was trapped. The fence was 12 feet of woven steel, topped with a snarl of barbed wire. An impossible climb for a healthy man, let alone one with a dead, frozen arm and a gaping wound in his other. But the custodian didn't know about my arm. Not really. He called it contaminated. He didn't know what it could do. I didn't either. I grabbed the fence with my good right hand, the metal biting into my palm. The lead box banged heavily against my hip. The custodian was 10 yards away. He stopped, smiled his thin, bloodless smile, and took careful aim at my chest. I had no choice. I reached up with my left hand. The dead hand. The Umbra arm. The second my frozen, white-skinned fingers touched the chain link, the world dissolved into a blizzard of white-hot cold. It wasn't just pain. It was power. The black, pulsing veins in my arm lit up, a visible, sickening lattice of black light under my skin. The thump-thump from the box at my hip accelerated, matching the roar in my ears. I felt the cold burn in my hand lock onto the metal of the fence. My fingers, numb and useless moments before, closed on the steel links with the force of a hydraulic press. Fat. The custodian fired again. The bullet tore through the fabric of my jacket, grazing my right arm. A flash of hot, wet pain, and I barely felt it. It was a pinprick compared to the cosmic frost consuming my left side. I wasn't climbing. I was pulling. I used the dead arm as an anchor, a grapple of pure, void-powered energy. It didn't feel pain. It didn't feel fatigue. It just held. I scrambled with my feet, my good hand finding purchase. The custodian's composure finally broke. He saw what I was doing. He saw the impossible climb. He started to run toward me. I reached the top. The barbed wire. I didn't care. I threw my weight over. The barbs snagged my clothes, my skin. I didn't feel them. I only felt the burning cold of my arm and the pulsing heat of the box. I dropped. It was a solid 10-foot fall. I landed in a pile of sodden cardboard boxes in the adjoining alley, the impact jarring every bone in my body, knocking the wind from me in a painful gasp. I heard the custodian shout in pure frustration on the other side of the fence. He's over. Sector 2. Sector 2. Lock down the street. I lay there for only a second, gasping for air. I looked at my left hand. The chain link had torn it open. But it wasn't bleeding. Not red, anyway. A thin, black, oily substance, the same liquid I'd seen in the tunnel, was weeping from the cuts before freezing solid in the cold morning air, sealing the wounds. The infection. It was adapting. I looked at my shoulder. The black veins were thicker, pulsing with a slow, heavy rhythm. They were past my collarbone, crawling up the side of my neck. I was running out of time. I staggered out of the second alley, this one opening onto a main thoroughfare. Ethelberg was waking up. A street cleaner's truck hissed past. A few early morning commuters, huddled in their coats, stared at me. I was a spectacle. A man covered in mud, filth, and blood, my left arm held stiffly at my side, my skin pale and waxy. I heard the squeal of tires, too fast, too controlled. I looked left. The black sedan. It had rounded the block. It was half a block away, accelerating, its dark, polarized windows staring at me like the eyes of an insect. I ran. I ran into the sparse traffic, ignoring the blare of a taxi's horn. My lungs burned. My good arm screamed in protest. The box at my hip felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The custodians wouldn't shoot me here. Not in the open. Not with witnesses. They would run me down. The sedan swerved, mounting the curb, cutting me off. Ahead of me, a refuge. The green, wrought iron canopy of a subway entrance. Grand Library Station. Finch's map. The Keystone. It was the only place I could go. It was a terrible risk. They would know. They would know where I was going. But the surface was a death trap. I needed the tunnels. I needed the dark. I bolted for the stairs, the sedan screeching to a halt behind me. Doors opened. Stop him. Do not let him go underground. I vaulted the turnstile, ignoring the shout of the startled transit attendant in the booth. I hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my body screaming. I hit the platform. It was almost empty. A single train was just pulling away, its bell chiming. An uptown train. The wrong direction. Above me, I heard the heavy booted footsteps of the custodians storming the station. Not just the man in the suit. 2 others. In full tactical armor, the same kind I'd seen in the tunnel. I was trapped again. I looked at the empty, dark tunnel the uptown train had just left. I looked at the 3 men fanning out at the top of the stairs, their weapons raised. I had no choice. I ran to the edge of the platform and, without hesitating, jumped down onto the tracks. He's in the tunnel. He's on the tracks. Cut the power. I ignored the shouts. I pulled my dying flashlight from my pocket, its beam weak and yellow. I ran into the suffocating pitch-black maw of the subway tunnel, back into the veins of the city. I was back where I started. Hunted. In the dark. But this time, I wasn't just being chased by a 2-billion-year-old monster. I was being chased by the men who wanted to set it free. Chapter 10. The third rail. The darkness of the subway tunnel was a physical thing. It was thick, heavy, and smelled of brake dust, ozone, and something ancient and wet. My dying flashlight was a joke, its yellow beam barely penetrating 10 feet, illuminating the gravel ballast and the slick, vibrating steel of the tracks. Behind me, the shouts were disciplined. Fan out. West Tunnel. Asset is on foot. Use thermals. K-Team, cut him off at 59th Street. They weren't just chasing me. They were herding me. I ran, stumbling on the uneven ties. My good arm was on fire from the graze. My bad arm was a frozen, super dense weight, a piece of the abyss I was dragging along. The black veins in my neck were pulsing, a cold throb that matched the lead box at my hip. The Umbra was far away, but its infection was right here. My biggest fear wasn't the men behind me. It was the rail beside me. The third rail. Cut the power, they had yelled. But had they? Was the grid down? Or was I running through a live-wire hell of electrified steel? Ahead, my weak light glinted off a patch of wetness. A service alcove, set into the curved tunnel wall. I ducked into it, pressing my back against the cold, weeping brick. I risked a look. The tunnel behind me lit up. 3 beams of intense, blue-white light. Not flashlights. Tactical, weapon-mounted beams. They were moving fast, sweeping the darkness. He's not on the main line, a voice echoed. Check the alcoves. Scan for the energy signature. The signature. The stone. It was a beacon. I couldn't hide. I was trapped. The alcove was a dead end. I fumbled with my jacket, my good hand shaking, and pulled out Finch's map. I held it in the dying beam of my flashlight. Grand Library Station. It was still 2 stops away. But the map. Finch's intricate overdrawing, it showed something else. A dotted line. An old, forgotten passage. It was labeled Maintenance Conduit 4B. And it branched off the main subway line, right here. This alcove wasn't a dead end. It was a doorway. I slammed my back against the brick, feeling for a seam, a handle, anything. Nothing. Just solid, 19th century brickwork. Got him. The shout was close. Too close. A blue-white beam pinned me, blinding me. Dr. Hayes, do not move. Put the asset on the ground. Slowly. A figure in black tactical armor stepped into view, his weapon raised. He was 20 yards away. He was approaching slowly. I looked at the brick wall. I looked at the custodian. I looked at my left arm. The infection. The cold burn. The impossible strength. The custodian took another step. I will not ask again. This is not a negotiation. I can't, I gasped, pressing against the wall. It's stuck. I was playing for time. Fine. He raised his weapon. No, I yelled. I turned to the wall and, in a desperate, insane gamble, I hit it. I struck the brick with my infected left fist. It wasn't a punch. It was a demolition. There was no sound of impact. Just a thud. The cold in my arm flared, becoming a universe of ice, and the energy transferred. The brickwork didn't shatter, it disintegrated. A cloud of pulverized mortar and brick dust exploded outward. There was a hole. A dark, gaping hole where my fist had been. The custodian stopped dead. His light wavered. What the? I didn't wait. I hit it again. The hole widened. I could see the passage from Finch's map. Subject is breaching the wall, the custodian yelled. Non-lethal. Take him now. He fired. A small, high-velocity canister shot from his weapon and hit the wall next to my head. It exploded with a blinding crack and a cloud of vapor. Tear gas. My eyes and lungs were instantly on fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see, but I could feel. The pain of the gas was nothing compared to the cold fire in my arm. I grabbed the edge of the hole I'd made and pulled. An entire section of the wall collapsed. He's in the conduit. I scrambled through the rubble, falling into another tunnel. This one was smaller, older. Cast iron. A service way. I looked back. The tactical officer was right behind me, his visor filtering the gas, his weapon coming up. I was out of options. I was out of time. I looked down. Running along the floor of this new tunnel was a bundle of thick, insulated, high-voltage cables. The main power feed for the third rail. I didn't think. I acted. I grabbed the thickest cable with my left hand. The Umbra hand. The effect was instantaneous. The cold in my arm devoured the electricity. It was like feeding a starving animal. 1 billion volts of raw, city power surged into my arm. The black veins on my skin erupted, glowing with a terrible, white-hot light. The pain was beyond description, an agony that seemed to tear my soul apart. I screamed. The cable in my hand, its insulation vaporized, turned cherry red, then white, then melted. The lights in the entire subway tunnel, the pursuit beams, the dim emergency lights, everything, exploded in a shower of sparks. A blue-white apocalypse. A massive arc of pure, uncontrolled electricity leaped from my hand, not at the custodian, but at the metal walls of the tunnel. The entire conduit became a thunderclap. The air cracked. The custodian was thrown backward, his armor smoking, his system shorted out. The men behind him were shouting in panic, their optics fried, their world plunged into the same absolute, terrifying darkness that I now inhabited. I had cut the power. I had cut all of it. I collapsed to my knees, my body convulsing. My arm was a ruin. It was smoking, the skin charred and frozen at the same time, the black veins now seared into my flesh like a tattoo. But the box at my hip, the pulsing, it had stopped. I had overloaded it. I had given it so much energy, it had finally, blissfully, gone quiet. The beacon was off. I was alone, in the dark, in agony. But for the first time since I'd stepped into that excavation pit, I was invisible. I crawled deeper into the service conduit, dragging my ruined arm, following a dead man's map, the silence of the blacked-out city ringing in my ears. Chapter 11. The Hunger of the Vein. There was no sound. There was no light. There was only the smell of ozone, burnt plastic, and incinerated dust. I was on my knees in the cast-iron service conduit, my body a single, screaming nerve of agony. The explosion had been definitive. I had done the impossible. I had weaponized my own infection, and in doing so, plunged the entire subterranean grid of Ethelberg into a silent, pre-industrial darkness. The shouts of the custodians were gone, swallowed by the sudden, oppressive silence. Their tech was fried. Their advantage was gone. But so was mine. I fumbled for my flashlight, my good hand patting the gritty floor. I found it. It was a useless piece of melted plastic. I was blind. Truly, utterly blind. I leaned back against the curved iron wall, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The tear gas was still a faint, acrid memory in my sinuses, but the real pain was my left arm. I had to assess the damage. With my right hand, I slowly, dreading what I would find, reached over and touched my left. My jacket sleeve was gone. Not burned away. It had been fused, integrated into the flesh underneath. I touched my forearm. It was not skin. It was something else. It was hard, like chitin. It was rigid, unyielding, and covered in a brittle, charred crust. It was completely, terrifyingly numb. I had destroyed it. I had saved myself by sacrificing my arm. A fair trade, I supposed. But then, I tried to move my fingers. They moved. It was not the slow, clumsy movement of a damaged limb. It was a crisp, cracking, alien motion. The charred crust on my new skin cracked and flaked away, falling to the tunnel floor with the sound of dry leaves. And the pain, the blinding, white-hot agony from the third rail, it was gone. No, not gone. It had been consumed. A terrible, dawning realization settled in my gut, colder than any fear I had felt before. The umbra. The infection. It feeds on energy. I hadn't hurt it with the electricity. I had fed it. I had given a starving, cosmic parasite a high-voltage, all-you-can-eat buffet. The infection wasn't just a tag. It wasn't just a wound. It was a symbiote. And it was evolving. Underneath the flaking char, my hand was different. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The black veins were no longer in my skin. They were my skin. It was a smooth, sculpted, biomechanical gauntlet that was now a permanent part of me. A new sensation trickled into my brain. I could feel the tunnel. Not with my hand, but through it. I could feel the residual static in the dead cables, the slight vibration of a water main half a mile away, the skittering of a rat in a parallel pipe. My senses were changing. And the box at my hip. I touched it. The lead was warped, blistered from the heat of the arc. But the pulsing was gone. It was just a cold, inert lump of metal. I had silenced the beacon. But I had become one myself. I didn't need a flashlight. I held up my new, monstrous left hand. And in the absolute, pitch-black darkness, I could see it. It was glowing. Not with light, but with a faint, purple-black anti-light. An aura of pure void. And in that cold, dead glow, I could see the walls of the tunnel around me. I was a monster. A sound. It came from the main subway tunnel I had just left. A wet, dragging, slithering sound. My heart seized. It wasn't the custodians. This was the sound of something large, heavy, and boneless, moving through the gravel. The blackout. It hadn't just stopped the custodians. It had shut down all the systems. The magnetic containment fields. The frequency emitters. All the little, invisible fences K-Tech and its predecessors had built to keep the Umbra's influence localized to Sector Gamma. The prisoner wasn't just awake. The cage door was open. And its tendrils were loose in the maze. I had to move. Now, I pulled out Finch's map. In the sickening faint light of my own corrupted arm, I could just make out the lines. The service conduit. It ran for another quarter-mile, then a ladder. Up. Into the steam tunnels. The steam tunnels would take me directly beneath the foundations of the Ethelberg Grand Library. I got to my feet. My body was a wreck, but the cold fire in my left arm was a constant, steady source of power. It didn't tire. It didn't ache. It just was. I ran. My footsteps echoed in the iron tube. I didn't need to feel the wall. My new, alien senses gave me a perfect, sonar-like image of the tunnel around me. Behind me, the slithering sound grew faster, louder. It was in the conduit with me. It knew where I was. The stone in the box might be quiet, but I was screaming its signature into the dark. I saw the ladder. A simple, rusted iron construct, bolted to the wall, leading up into a dark, square hole in the ceiling. I grabbed the first rung with my good hand. It was slick with moisture. I grabbed the second rung with my left hand. The moment my void hand touched the metal, the iron groaned. The cold in my arm flared, and I felt the rusted metal bond to my grip. I didn't climb. I pulled. I ascended the shaft in 3 powerful, terrifying bounds, my new arm doing the work of my entire body. I hauled myself up onto the next level. The air here was different. It was hot, thick, humid, and filled with the sound of a dull, distant roar. The steam tunnels. I looked down the shaft I had just climbed. The slithering sound stopped, right at the base. From the darkness below, a pool of that oily sentient blackness began to swell. It was amorphous, a shifting mass of shadow. And from its center, a single glistening tendril rose, looking up at me. It was testing me, seeing what I was. Then from the box at my hip, a single, slow, heavy pulse. Thump. The stone wasn't dead. It was just rebooting. The tendril below me reared back. It wasn't attacking. It was obeying. The stone. The key. It wasn't just a beacon, it was a symbol of authority. The tendril slowly, reluctantly, retracted back into the darkness. It wasn't hunting me. It was escorting me. I was no longer just a thief. I was its new keeper. And I was walking, not into a library, but into the heart of its power. Chapter 12. The First Vein. The steam tunnels were a different kind of hell. If the conduits below were a cold, dead tomb, this was a living, breathing dragon's lung. The air was thick, wet, and scalding. The sound was a constant, deafening roar, a symphony of 1,000 hissing pipes and the distant thunder of the city's main boilers. Visibility was almost zero. Steam, thick and white, billowed from every joint and seam. I was blind again. My weak, human eyes were useless, stinging and watering from the heat and moisture. But I was not blind. My left arm, my void arm, was my guide. The faint, purple-black aura it emitted was swallowed by the steam, but my senses, they were a different story. I held my monstrous hand up. The charred, chitinous surface seemed to drink in the environment. I didn't just feel the heat, I saw it. The pipes around me glowed, not with light, but with thermal energy. I saw the superheated steam as lines of brilliant white fire, the cooler condensation on the walls as dull gray, the pockets of frigid air as pits of black. And I saw something else. Through the chaos of the city's plumbing, I saw a single, unwavering line of pure, deep, cold. It was a river of energy, a vein of the same void stuff that now inhabited my arm. It was the line from Finch's map, the Serpent's Vein. It was running, just as he'd drawn it, straight toward the heart of the city. I put the map away. I didn't need it anymore. I was a dowsing rod, and I was pointed at the well. I began to walk. The roar of the steam was a physical weight, but I moved through it, my new senses painting a perfect, three-dimensional map of the labyrinth. And I felt it. The hunger. The energy I had absorbed from the third rail had been a feast, but it was over. Now, I was starving. The infection in my arm, the symbiote, it was thirsty. The ambient heat of the steam tunnels was a tease, a faint aroma. But as I walked, I passed a junction box, a modern, steel-plated conduit of live, electrical wiring for the upper world. My arm lunged. I was not in control. My void hand snapped out, my fingers splayed, and slammed against the junction box, intending to feed. I shouted, not in my voice, but in a low, guttural growl that wasn't human. I used my good arm, my human arm, to grab my left wrist, pulling it back with all my strength. No, I gasped, my voice raw. No, I'm still in here. My left arm fought me. It was stronger. So much stronger. The chitinous plates on its surface flexed, the muscles underneath like coiled steel cables. The junction box groaned, the metal cover denting under the pressure. The stone at my hip pulsed. Thump. It was a command. A reprimand. Not now. Not this. My void arm, reluctantly, relaxed. The hunger receded, not gone, but banked, like a hot coal. I stood there, panting, my human hand still clamped around my alien wrist. The stone was the key. My arm was the lock. And the stone, it was in charge. For now, I was a slave to a 2-billion-year-old rock. I forced myself to move on, giving the live cables a wide berth. I was a weapon that was fighting not to fire. I followed the serpent's vein of cold energy for what felt like a mile. The tunnels grew older. The modern, insulated pipes gave way to massive, cast-iron behemoths, riveted together in the 19th century. The brickwork was replaced by older, hand-hewn stone. I was getting close. I came to a small, circular chamber where 5 tunnels converged. The steam was thinner here. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the cold, dead light of my own hand, was a carving. It was etched into the ancient stone floor. It was not the sigil of the 3 veils. It was simpler. An older variant. It was a single, deep, circular groove, with a mark in the center that looked like a handprint. But the handprint had 6 fingers. I knelt, my human hand hovering over the carving. A keeper. Another keeper, from long before Finch, long before the custodians, long before anyone. Had they also been changed? Was this a warning? or a welcome. The cold energy, the vein, did not stop. It flowed into this chamber and flowed out, through the smallest, oldest-looking tunnel. This one was not brick or iron. It was carved from the natural bedrock. I entered it. The air changed instantly. The oppressive, wet heat of the steam tunnels vanished, replaced by a deep, profound, ancient cold. The same cold I'd felt in the excavation pit. The tunnel ended. It opened up into a space so vast, my new senses could barely map the edges. I was standing on a ledge. Below me was a chasm, and at the bottom of that chasm was the Ethelberg keystone. It was not a keystone in the architectural sense. It was not a small, central stone. It was the entire foundation of the Ethelberg Grand Library, a massive, perfectly square, seamless slab of the 2-billion-year-old black obsidian, the Impossibility Stone. It was a quarter-mile wide, resting in this massive, unnatural cavern, and the entire, massive, granite and marble library had been built on top of it. Finch had been right. The library wasn't just a building. It was a lid. It was the final, monumental seal on the true center of the lock. The serpent's vein of cold energy flowed down the cavern wall, across the chasm, and pooled in the very center of the black slab, in a faint, circular depression. I had to get to it. I looked down. There was a path. A narrow, treacherous-looking spiral staircase of carved stone, clearly part of the original, pre-human structure, led down the chasm wall. I took the first step, and I realized the true, horrifying purpose of my journey. The custodians, K-Tech, they thought the stone, the key I was carrying, was the component. They wanted to plug it into their tower. They were fools. The stone was the authorization. The keystone slab was the door. And my arm, my corrupted, void-infused, energy-devouring arm, that was the physical key. The Umbra hadn't just tagged me. It hadn't just infected me. It had remade me. It had forged me into the one and only thing in the universe that could interface with this ancient machine. I reached the bottom of the chasm. I stood on the edge of the black, seamless plain. The cold was so intense, my human side was shutting down, my breath shallow, my good hand numb and blue. But my left side felt alive. It thrived in this. I walked toward the center, toward the depression where the energy pooled. The box at my hip was pulsing faster now. Thump, thump, thump. I stood before it. The depression was 10 feet wide, perfectly circular, and smooth as glass. I knew what I had to do. I was a historian about to rewrite history. I was a man about to open a door that had been sealed before life on Earth had learned to walk. I looked at my left hand, the chitinous, glowing, monstrous thing that was no longer mine. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I plunged my hand into the heart of the Ethelberg keystone. Chapter 13. The Architect's Vision. The second my hand touched the depression, the black slab stopped being solid. It wasn't like sinking into water. It was like sinking into nothing. A cold, perfect vacuum that pulled my arm in up to the elbow. The stone I had carried, the key in the lead box at my hip, flared with a sudden, violent, internal light, the lead casing doing nothing to stop the pure, white-hot pulse of energy. It was no longer a beacon. It was a broadcast. I screamed. My mind, the consciousness of Dr. Owen Hayes, was ripped from my body. I was no longer in a chasm beneath Ethelberg. I was in space. Not the space of telescopes and photographs. This was deep space, a blackness so profound it was a color I had never seen, and the stars were sharp, angry diamonds. I was everywhere and nowhere. I had no body. I was pure, disembodied thought. And I was not alone. I felt a presence. Not a voice, not a person, but a vast, ancient, and sorrowful intelligence. This was the Keystone's memory. This was the architect's last will and testament. And it showed me everything. I saw a galaxy, not ours, bloom and die. I saw a race of beings, tall, slender, with 6-fingered hands, their bodies seeming to be made of woven light. They were artists, engineers, poets, and they were running. I saw what they were running from. The Umbra. It was not a creature. It was a condition. A sentient, cosmic shadow, a parasite born in the cold void between galaxies. It was a form of anti-life, and it fed on the energy of nascent, living worlds. I watched in silent, paralyzed horror as it inhaled the light of a star, as it drained entire planets, leaving them as cold, gray husks. It was the universe's predator. I saw the 6-fingered architects arrive at Earth, a young, blue-green world teeming with potential, its core a roaring dynamo of geomagnetic energy. A feast. But the Umbra was already here. It had burrowed deep, lodging itself in the planet's mantle, wrapping itself around the core, and it was drinking. It was a parasite, growing fat, preparing to consume its host. The architects, exhausted, their civilization shattered, made their last stand. They couldn't kill it. The Umbra was too vast, too elemental. But they could contain it. They could starve it. I saw them build the lock. It wasn't just in Ethelberg. It was a global network. I saw them sink massive black keystones in what would become the Amazon, in the depths of the Mariana Trench, in the ice of Antarctica. They built a cage, not of bars, but of frequencies. An energy net that severed the Umbra's connection to the planet's core. They trapped it, enraged and starving, in a subterranean prison of their design. And the Ethelberg keystone, the slab my hand was sunk into, was the master control. The primary node. I saw them create the fail-safes. The keys, like the one I carried, designed to authorize a user. And I saw them change a few of the planet's primitive, evolving life forms, giving them the genetic potential to become keepers. A lineage of guardians, like Finch's ancestors, tasked with watching the prison. Then, I saw them leave. Their great light ships ascended, leaving a planet that was saved, but forever burdened. Their final, telepathic lament echoed in my mind. What is contained must never be freed. What is starved must never be fed. The vision flashed forward. I saw the network, the lock, weakening. Billions of years of continental drift, of earthquakes, of human wars, of industry. The prison was failing. The Umbra was stirring. And then I saw the Apex Tower. I saw Mark Davidson. I saw K-Tech Dynamics. I saw the custodians. They weren't just fools. They were heretics. They had found the prison. They had found a node. And they had misunderstood. They saw the Umbra's raw, void energy not as a threat, but as a power source. The ultimate, inexhaustible, zero-point energy. The Apex Tower wasn't a containment system. It was a siphon. They weren't reinforcing the lock. They were tapping it. They were building a massive, superconducting antenna designed to draw the Umbra's energy up from the depths and broadcast it, to harness it. The vision screamed at me. They are not sealing the door. They are opening a spigot. They will feed it. They will give it the power it needs to break the other nodes. They will free it. The vision shattered. A sound, sharp and loud, ripped through my consciousness. A gunshot. I was back. I was in my body. The chasm. My hand was still buried in the black slab, which was now thrumming, a deep, resonant hum that shook my bones. He's here. He's at the keystone. I looked up. On the spiral staircase, a dozen high-powered beams cut through the gloom. A new team of custodians. They were in silver, armored, environmental suits, not black tactical gear. They were built for this cold, alien environment. They were fanning out at the bottom of the chasm, their weapons raised. Dr. Hayes. The voice was the same, calm, amplified. The man in the suit from the alley. He was here. You have activated the primary node. You do not know what you have done. Step away. Give us the key. I ripped my arm free. The slab's hum died instantly, plunging the chasm back into near silence. The new, terrible knowledge was burning in my mind. You're going to free it, I gasped, my voice raw. We are going to control it, the leader snapped. The future of human energy. An end to war, to famine. All it requires is a reorganization. The Umbra is power. We are its new masters. You can't master a hurricane, I yelled. It's a parasite. It will kill this planet. An acceptable risk. Now, seize him. The key is paramount. The silver-suited custodians advanced, their rifles aimed at me. I looked at the staircase. My only way out. They were blocking it. I was trapped at the bottom of the chim, at the heart of the lock, with a dozen soldiers between me and the surface. But the architect's vision, it hadn't just shown me the problem. It had shown me the machine. I wasn't trapped. I turned my back on the custodians and ran, not for the stairs, but for the far wall of the chasm. He's escaping. Don't let him leave the chamber. I reached the wall. It was sheer, seamless, ancient bedrock. A dead end. You have nowhere to go, Doctor. I looked at the wall, and now, armed with the architect's knowledge, I saw what was invisible to them. A faint, six-fingered handprint, carved into the stone. Finch was wrong about the steam tunnels. They weren't the only way. This was a vent. A pressure release conduit. Part of the lock's original design. I slammed my void hand against the carving. The key at my hip pulsed. Authorized. The solid rock wall dissolved in a cascade of light, revealing a perfectly circular, pitch-black tunnel. An express route. I looked back. The custodians had stopped, their weapons lowered in sheer, stunned disbelief. "My God," their leader whispered. "He's not a thief. He's a pilgrim." I smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "You're not just fighting a historian anymore," I called back, my voice echoing in the vast, cold chamber. "You're fighting the locksmith." I turned and disappeared into the void. Chapter 14. The Siphon. The moment I stepped into the tunnel, the doorway of light vanished. There was no sound of grinding rock, no sliding door. The wall of the chasm simply was again solid, seamless. I was sealed inside. I was in the veins of the machine. The tunnel was a perfect 20-foot circle, made of the same impossible, joint-free black stone. It was not a natural cave, not a man-made tunnel. This was their work, the work of the architects. There was no light, but I didn't need it. My void arm, my locksmith's hand, pulsed with its own cold, internal aura. It illuminated the passage in shades of purple and black, a visible extension of my new, alien senses. The air was still, cold and pure, with a faint, sterile smell of ozone. A crystalline silence. I was alone. The custodians were on the other side of that wall, stunned, separated from me by 2 billion years of engineering. But I wasn't safe. I had the vision. I had the truth. K-Tech, the executive, they thought they were harnessing a power source. They were fools. They were drilling a hole in a pressurized tank, and the only thing that wanted that hole drilled was the prisoner inside. The Umbra wasn't just the prisoner. It was an active participant. It wanted the Apex Tower to be built. It was letting them siphon its energy, a calculated, patient gambit. A small feed now, just enough to get them addicted, just enough to give them the power to complete the siphon, which would, in turn, give the Umbra the power to shatter the entire global lock. They were giving the parasite the key to its own cage. And I was the only one who knew. The last, accidental keeper, remade by the very thing I was meant to fight. I started to run. But running was the wrong word. The tunnel was on a slight, almost imperceptible decline. The floor was smooth as glass. I felt a pull, a gentle, persistent, artificial gravity, drawing me deeper, faster. This wasn't a hallway. It was a transit tube, a biomechanical artery designed to move a keeper from the keystone to the other nodes. Where was it taking me? The answer was obvious. The vision had shown me the threat. This tunnel was taking me to the breach. It was taking me back to Sector Gamma. I braced myself, sliding more than running, my good hand trailing on the impossibly smooth wall to keep my balance. And then, the hunger returned. It was a quiet, insidious ache at first, starting in the chitinous plates of my left hand and radiating up my arm. The energy from the third rail was gone, burned away in the blast. The symbiote was starving again. My arm ached for energy, for the steam pipes, for a junction box, for anything. I fought the urge, gritting my teeth. But then, a new sensation. The walls of the tunnel, they were thrumming. A very faint, low-level energy was bleeding from the black stone itself. It was the serpent's vein, the energy of the lock. And my arm, the key, it was drinking. It was a low, slow, ambient feed. The hunger in my arm didn't vanish, but it eased. The gnawing desperation subsided, replaced by a steady, cold flow of power. The architect's design. It was a fail-safe. The tunnel itself sustained the keeper. It strengthened me. It repaired me. I felt the charred, brittle crust on my arm crackle and flake away, revealing the smooth, new, dark chitin skin underneath. It was horrifying, and it was efficient. I was becoming less of Dr. Owen Hayes and more of the locksmith. The transit felt like it took minutes, though I must have traveled miles. I felt the city of Ethelberg shift and rumble far above me. Then, a new vibration. A deep, rhythmic, industrial heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It was not the lock. It was not the Umbra. It was human. It was massive, powerful, and new. The siphon. The custodians in the chasm must have radioed the surface. Their leader, the executive, knew I was in the system. He knew I was coming. He had just turned the machine on. The tunnel ended. It opened up into a chamber so vast that even my new senses struggled to map it. I was standing on a ledge, high up. I was back. This was Sector Gamma. This was the void from the GPR scans. It was a perfect sphere, 1,000 feet across, carved from the bedrock, its walls lined with the same black, architect stone. It was a machine, a node, a vital organ in the planet-spanning lock. In the center of the sphere, hanging suspended in the vast, cold emptiness, was a geometric marvel, a spinning crystalline lattice the size of a house. It was glowing with a faint, contained, blue light, the heart of the node. But the machine was wounded. From the very top of the sphere, from the ceiling far above me, a wound had been punched. It was the K-Tech drill. A massive, industrial drill bit, 30 feet across, had violated the sacred space. And from that wound, two things were descending. First, the grout. The thick, gray, insulting slurry of concrete Mark Davidson had been so eager to pump. It was pouring down in a massive, steady column, splashing onto the crystalline heart of the node, trying to bury it, to choke it. But the second thing was worse. Alongside the grout, a new device was being lowered. It was a massive, complex assembly of metal and wires, ending in a colossal, three-pronged claw. It was a tap, a siphon. It was descending, slowly, menacingly, toward the glowing, spinning crystal. And on the floor of the sphere, far below me, I saw them. Dozens of them. Custodians in the same silver environmental suits, swarming the base of the chamber, setting up lights, sensor arrays, and weapons. They were waiting for me. My transit tube had deposited me on a high ledge, like a balcony in an opera house of the apocalypse. I was overlooking the entire operation. The executive's voice boomed over a loudspeaker system, echoing in the vast, spherical chamber. The locksmith has arrived. The final component is in play. He didn't know where I was, not yet. But he knew I was here. Activate the siphon. Full power, his voice commanded. Let us welcome our guest. The massive, three-pronged claw descended. The concrete slurry pounded down. The heart of the lock was under assault. And I, the historian, the accidental keeper, was the only thing standing in their way. Chapter 15. The Desecration. The executive's command, full power, was not a shout. It was a calm, cold sentence of execution. And the machine obeyed. A deep, bone-vibrating whine began to climb the scale, starting at a subsonic rumble and rising to a scream that set my teeth on edge. The massive, three-pronged siphon, now just yards above the spinning, blue-glowing crystal, lit up. Arcs of raw, white-hot energy snapped between its prongs. This was not a drill. It was an attack. Let us welcome our guest, the voice echoed again, and I realized with a cold chill that he knew I was on this ledge. The transit tube was a known exit. They had been waiting for me. This entire operation was a trap, and I was the bait. But the real horror was what happened next. The siphon was not attacking the crystal. It was calling to it. And the umbra, it was answering. The spinning, blue, crystalline heart of the node, its pure light began to flicker. It dimmed. And from its core, dark, oily black tendrils, the same sentient shadow I'd seen in the tunnels, began to uncoil. They weren't fighting the siphon. They were reaching for it. The umbra was willingly flowing into the tap. It was a prisoner, gleefully handing its jailer the key. At the same time, the second assault continued. The massive unending column of gray grout pounded down, a muddy, insulting waterfall, splashing against the crystal, trying to smother it. I finally understood. The vision was right. The concrete wasn't just to bury the old tech, it was to insulate the new. It was a containment shell, designed to choke off the lock's natural function while channeling the raw, void energy only into K-Tech's siphon. They were building a flawed parasitic machine right on top of the architect's perfect, balanced one. This wasn't just a breach. It was a desecration. I looked down. The silver-suited custodians were on the floor, 100 yards below, their weapons aimed up at me. They were a net, waiting for me to fall. I was out of time. I had seconds. I ran along the narrow ledge, back toward the wall I had come from. The architect's wall. He's moving, a shout from below. Lock him down. Subdue the asset. I didn't have a plan. I had instinct. The knowledge from the keystone. I was the locksmith. This was my house. I reached the seamless black wall, ignoring the shouts. I slammed my void hand against it. I didn't punch. I willed. I envisioned a path. I envisioned a bridge. From my ledge to the central, besieged crystal. The stone, the entire sphere, responded. The black wall under my hand became pliant, like liquid stone. It flowed outward, projecting a narrow, 10-foot-long bridge of the same black material. The bridge stopped, hanging in the abyss. It wasn't enough. I need to get there. I screamed, focusing my will, my hunger, my despair, into my arm. I pushed the architect's knowledge into the node. Thump. The key at my hip pulsed. Authorized. With a sound like a low, resonant chord, a second bridge of black, solid light shot out from the end of the first, spanning the 500-foot chasm, connecting my ledge directly to the platform holding the spinning crystal. It was a path. My path. The custodians below erupted in chaos. He's building. He's interfacing with the node. Fire. Fire at will. A hail of energy fire erupted from the floor. Blasts of coherent, superheated light, the same kind the custodian had used on the Umbra in the tunnel, streaked toward me. I ran. I ran out onto the bridge of light. There was no railing, just a 5-foot-wide path of impossible, ancient tech, hanging over a 1,000-foot drop. The air was filled with the roar of the concrete, the scream of the siphon, and the snap hiss of energy beams slicing the air around me. A beam hit the bridge just ahead of me. The bridge didn't shatter. It absorbed the energy, the impact point glowing white-hot for a second before fading back to black. It feeds. The entire machine feeds. I was halfway across. A second squad of custodians, ones I hadn't seen, appeared on catwalks near the ceiling, level with me. They were cutting off my path. "Locksmith," a voice barked much closer. "Cease. You are contaminating the primary." A beam hit me. It struck me square in the left shoulder. The force was like being hit by a truck. But the energy, my void arm rejoiced. I didn't feel pain. I felt ecstasy. The hunger vanished, replaced by a surge of raw, giddy power. The symbiote drank the blast. The black, chitinous plates on my arm glowed, the energy arcing across my skin, and I felt my arm heal. The last vestiges of the char from the third rail flaked away. I looked at the custodian on the catwalk, his weapon smoking. I was a battery, and he had just charged me. "More," I growled, the voice not my own. I ran, faster now, fueled by their attack. They fired again. I brought my left arm up, not as a hand, but as a shield. The beams hit the black, chitinous surface and were devoured. I was invincible, as long as they kept feeding me. "Stop firing. Energy weapons are ineffective. He's metabolizing it. Switch to kinetic." Too late. I reached the central platform. I was at ground zero. The noise was a physical, crushing weight. The siphon was directly above me, its 3 prongs whining, now just inches from the crystal. The concrete was pouring down on me, a heavy, gray, muddy rain that caked my clothes, my skin, the platform. The crystal itself, the heart of the node, was sputtering. The blue light was almost gone, choked by the black, parasitic tendrils of the Umbra reaching up, and the gray, suffocating mud of the humans pouring down. I was standing on a dying heart. The siphon began its final descent. The prongs lowered, ready to make contact, to complete the circuit and doom the world. I had to stop it. I looked up. The siphon was a machine of steel and wire. I could break it. My void arm was tingling with the power I'd absorbed. I could tear it apart. But the custodian's voices. He's metabolizing it. A cold, terrible realization. If I touch the siphon, if I break it now, where does the Umbra's energy go? It's already flowing. It's uncontained. It would flow into me. I would become the siphon. I would become the Umbra. I couldn't destroy the siphon. Not yet. I had to stop the flow. I had to restore the lock. I had to choose. I turned away from the descending machine and faced the dying, mud-caked, shadow-choked crystal. I was the locksmith. It was time to use the key. I raised my glowing, monstrous, void-infused left hand, and I plunged it into the heart of the lock. Chapter 16. The Reboot of the Node. The moment my hand entered the crystal, the universe inverted. If the keystone was a cold, clear vision of the past, this was a chaotic, drowning present. I wasn't just watching the machine, I was in it. I was the central processor, the guardian, the virus, and the cure, all at once. My consciousness exploded, splintering into a million points of light. I was the crystal. I felt everything. I felt the suffocation. The tons of wet, heavy, chemically inert concrete. It was a dumb, brutish weight, a physical gag, smothering the node's energy, clogging its pores. I felt the siphon. It was a hot, sharp, painful intrusion, a high-tech needle tapping the main artery, drawing out the lifeblood. And worst of all, I felt it. The Umbra. It wasn't just a tendril anymore. It was an ocean. A vast, cold, sentient, and joyful consciousness, swirling in the heart of the crystal, welcoming the siphon, guiding it, embracing its own liberation. It felt my presence, the presence of the locksmith, and it hated me. It lashed out, a psychic wave of pure cold malice that threatened to extinguish my mind. You are a flaw, a thought that was not my own whispered in my brain. An error. A temporary, warm-blooded mistake. We are inevitable. The siphon above me, its prongs now just centimeters from making a full, physical connection, whined in anticipation. The umbra surged to meet it. I was losing. The custodians below, seeing me standing rigid, my arm plunged into the glowing, dying heart, misinterpreted my stillness. He's interfacing. He's helping it. The siphon is at 99%. Full connection imminent. I was not Owen Hayes. I was the locksmith. And the architect's vision had taught me one thing. You do not fight the umbra. You contain it. You do not feed the shadow. You reignite the light. The energy. The power I had absorbed. The gift the custodians had given me. It was not mine. It was fuel. No. I roared, the sound coming from my throat and from the crystal itself, a dual, resonant shockwave. I took all the power from their weapons, all the void energy from my corrupted arm, and I pushed. I didn't push at the umbra. I pushed the energy into the crystal. I became a cosmic jumpstart. I forced my will, the architect's will, into the sputtering, dying engine. Reboot. For a second, nothing. And then, the node answered. A single, pure, perfect note of blue light, the color of a glacier's heart, erupted from where my hand was buried. It was a pinpoint. Then a flood. It was the lock's original, intended energy. Pure, cold, balanced containment. The blue light struck the black, oily tendrils of the umbra. The shadow screamed. It wasn't a sound, it was a psychic shockwave of agony. The blue light didn't just push the shadow, it cancelled it. It was anti-void. The blackness dissolved, boiled away, forced back into the infinitesimal cracks of its prison. The umbra's joyful anticipation turned to enraged, terrified panic. Externally, the chasm was reborn in light. The mud-caked, shadow-choked crystal exploded in a blinding, silent, pure blue nova. The concrete, the tons of gray slurry pouring from the ceiling, hit this new, pure energy field and was vaporized. The column of mud turned into a roaring, upward-blasting geyser of superheated steam. The siphon, the three-pronged claw, made contact. But it didn't connect to a willing, passive umbra. It connected to the full, unrestrained, rebooted fury of a 2-billion-year-old containment node. A sound like a mountain breaking in half tore the air. The siphon, designed to draw power, was force-fed it. A solid, 10-foot-thick arc of blue-white energy leaped from the crystal and slammed into the K-Tech machine. The machine exploded. It didn't just spark. It detonated. The massive, three-pronged claw vaporized. The explosion rocketed upward, back up the drill shaft, a catastrophic, high-energy rejection. I heard, far above, the sound of tearing metal and the screams of the K-Tech operators as their own machine was turned against them. The great wound in the ceiling of the sphere was cauterized, sealed in a slag of melted steel and flash-fused rock. The sphere was silent. The pouring concrete stopped. The whining siphon gone. There was only the spinning, crystalline heart of the node, now glowing with a pure, steady, brilliant blue. And me, standing at its center, my arm still buried to the elbow, a human circuit breaker in a divine machine. I had done it. I had rebooted the node. I had repelled the umbra. I was exhausted. The power I'd absorbed was gone, spent in that one desperate act. My arm was just an arm again. The glow faded. The hunger returned. And the voice of the executive crackled over the loudspeakers, no longer calm, no longer in control. It was a thin, reedy, furious shriek. He's destroyed it. He's destroyed the siphon. Kinetic rounds. Kinetic. Get him off that platform. Kill the locksmith. I turned, my arm still trapped in the crystal. On the floor, far below, the silver-suited custodians were advancing on my bridge. And on the catwalks, the other squad was running, converging on my position. They weren't firing energy weapons. They were holding rifles. Standard, old-fashioned, bullet-firing assault rifles. I was a sitting duck. My void arm was drained. I had no shield. I was a historian, trapped in the heart of his own discovery, and the bullets were coming. Chapter 17. The Locksmith's Choice. The first bullet pinged off the crystal platform, 6 inches from my foot. It didn't ricochet. The crystal was so dense, it simply absorbed the slug, leaving a small, white pockmark. I yanked at my arm. It was stuck. Fused. The node, the massive, rebooted machine, was holding me, its living circuit breaker. He's trapped. The executive's voice was a triumphant snarl over the loudspeakers. He's bonded to the artifact. Retrieval Team Alpha, ascend. Take the key. Take him. I was a sitting duck. My arm was drained. My human body was exhausted. And the kinetic rounds were getting closer. Bullets stitched a line across the platform. Whack, whack, whack. I winced as chips of 2-billion-year-old crystal, sharp as obsidian, sprayed my face. I was pinned, a target in a shooting gallery. From the floor, a half-dozen custodians, the silver-suited ones, were running onto the black bridge of light I had created. They were closing the distance fast. From the catwalks above, another team was firing grappling hooks, preparing to descend directly on top of me. This was it. I had saved the node, only to be captured, to be dissected, my key and my arm handed over to the very men who would misuse them. No. The thought was a defiant spark. I was not just Owen Hayes. I was the locksmith. And this was my machine. I stopped pulling. I stopped fighting the crystal. I listened to it. The node was thrumming, a steady, healthy, blue light pulse. It wasn't holding me. It was interfacing with me. And the energy I had given it, it was now offering back. Not a flood, not a weapon, but control. I felt my senses expand again. I felt the entire 1,000-foot sphere. I felt the bridge. I felt the custodians running on it. The lead custodian was 50 yards away, his rifle up, running full tilt. I was still fused to the crystal. I couldn't move. But I didn't need to. I willed it. The bridge of black, solid light that connected my platform to the ledge, dissolved. It didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It just ceased to be. The lead custodian's boot came down on empty air. His eyes, wide with sudden, uncomprehending terror, met mine across the chasm. He and the 5 men behind him were suspended for a single, perfect, cartoonish moment. Then, with a collective, muffled shout, they fell, tumbling into the dark, 1,000-foot abyss. I had just executed 6 men without touching them. The sphere was silent, save for the faint, steady hum of the rebooted node. The custodians on the catwalks above, they froze. They looked at me, then at the empty space where the bridge had been. Their rappelling lines were hooked, but they hesitated. I was no longer a man. I was part of the architecture. He controls it. The executive's voice was a choked whisper, all fury gone, replaced by a terrible cold awe. The architect's design, it's alive. He recovered quickly. Cut the lines. Rappel. He can't control everything. He was right. They dropped, sliding down their ropes, 10, 15, 20 of them, a spider's web of tactical assault, all converging on my small crystal island. I couldn't drop them all. I looked at my arm, still buried in the crystal. I had to get free. Let me go, I begged the machine. The fight isn't over. The crystal pulsed. It understood. But it had one last gift. One last burden. A torrent of information flooded my mind. It wasn't a vision. It was data. A cold, clear schematic of the entire global lock. I saw all the nodes. The one in the Amazon, faltering, choked by human industry. The one in the trench, groaning under impossible pressure. The one in Antarctica, stable, frozen. And I saw the Alpha node. The first one. The one that anchored the entire system. London. A new set of coordinates burned into my memory, a location in the oldest part of that ancient city. The Ethelberg node was stable, but the network was failing. The Umbra was repelled here, but it was seeping out elsewhere. Repair the chain, the machine's silent command echoed in my head. Seek the others. The locksmith must not fail. The crystal released me. The sensation was agonizing. My arm was ripped free with the sound of cracking, cooling glass. I fell to my knees, clutching the arm, which was now pulsing with a faint blue light, the pure energy of the lock, not the purple-black of the void. It was still a monster's arm, but it was my monster now. He's free. On the platform. Box him in. The first custodian landed, rolling, his rifle coming up. I was on my feet. The bridge was gone. The rappelling lines were everywhere. I was surrounded. I ran to the opposite edge of the crystal platform, the side that faced nothing but a sheer, seamless wall of black architect stone. A dead end. The custodian fired. A bullet snapped past my ear. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I was the locksmith. And the lock was a network. I reached the edge of the platform and I jumped. I leaped into the abyss, into the 1,000-foot drop. The custodians rushed to the edge, their weapons trained down, expecting to see my body impact the floor. But I didn't fall. A new, horizontal, circular doorway of light opened in the sheer wall, a transit tube I hadn't even known was there. The architect's escape hatch. A gravitational current, the same one from the first tube, grabbed me, pulling me from the air, and sucked me into the new, black, unknown tunnel. I had a fleeting, backward glance. I saw 20 silver-suited men, standing on a glowing blue platform, staring into an empty tunnel, their mission, their technology, their entire worldview, rendered utterly irrelevant. The door of light snapped shut behind me. I was gone. I was sliding weightless through the deep, cold arteries of the planet, my arm glowing with a new blue fire, and a single terrifying word echoing in my mind. London. The fight for Ethelberg was over. The war for the world had just begun. Chapter 18. King's Cross. The transit tube was a silent, black river. This was not the slow, gentle slide from the Keystone Chasm. This was a violent, high-speed shunt. I wasn't just moving under a city. I was moving under an ocean. I had no sense of speed, only of movement. The black, seamless walls of the tube were a blur, perceived only by the faint, blue, steady glow of my locksmith arm. The architect's network wasn't just a series of tunnels. It was a global, subterranean circulatory system. My mind raced, trying to process the flood of data the node had forced into my brain. London. The alpha node. The failing chain. I looked at my arm. The chitinous, black plates were still there, but the malevolent, purple, hungry aura was gone. It was now infused with the pure, blue, stable energy of the lock itself. The hunger was gone. The agonizing cold burn was gone. It no longer felt like a parasite. It felt like a tool. A part of me. It was still a monster's arm, but it was my monster. I thought of the men on the bridge. The men I had dropped into the abyss. There was no triumph in it. Just a cold, hard, grim necessity. The executive's voice. Kinetic rounds. Kill the locksmith. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't. They had tasted ultimate power, and I had just snatched it from their lips. K-Tech was not just a corporation. It was a cult. A cult that worshipped the Umbra as a god of energy, and they would stop at nothing to free it. And now, they knew. They knew about the locksmith. They knew the system was sentient. My hand went to my hip. The lead-line box was still there, a battered, warped lump of metal, fused to my belt by the energy of the third rail. I fumbled with the latch. It was melted shut. I didn't need to open it. I could feel the key inside. The original stone. It was silent, inert. Its purpose was complete. It was the authorization key that had allowed me, a human, to interface with the architect network. It had opened the door. Now I was the key. The sensation of movement slowed. The gravitational pull eased, the walls of the tube becoming distinct again. The tunnel began to spiral, a long, gradual ascent. The ride was over. The tube ended abruptly in a small, cramped, circular chamber. This place felt older than the Ethelberg node. The black stone here was duller, its surface pitted, as if by great age. The air was musty, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Rust. There was no door of light. There was just a flat, solid wall of what looked like Roman brick. It was out of place, an ancient human structure built directly against the architect's impossible tech. In the center of the wall was the familiar, six-fingered handprint. I placed my new, blue glowing void hand against it. There was no pulse of authorization. I was the authorization. The stone thrummed, a deep, granite-on-granite groan. The wall didn't dissolve. It split down the middle and slid apart, grinding on a mechanism that hadn't been used in millennia. I stepped out of the architect's world and into the world of men. I was in a crypt, or a sub-basement. The floor was slick with a century of grime. Ancient, brick-arched vaults stretched away into darkness. Pipes, thick with rust and asbestos lagging, snaked across the ceiling. The air was cold, but it was a human cold, and it carried the distinct, unmistakable smell of diesel fumes and old iron. I was not in Ethelberg. I followed the only path, a narrow corridor that led to a rusted, iron spiral staircase. It was a mirror of the one I'd taken into the chasm, but this one was crude, human-made, and treacherous. I climbed. My arm, my locksmith arm, lit the way. Its steady, blue glow was now my permanent flashlight, my shield, my key. The stairs ended at a heavy iron grate set into a stone ceiling. I pushed. It was impossibly heavy, sealed with rust. I didn't strain. I used the arm. I placed my void hand on the iron bars and pushed. Not with muscle, but with will. The blue energy flared. The rusted hinges and lock didn't just break, they disintegrated into fine, red-brown powder. The grate flew open with a heavy clang. I hauled myself up into a disused, fenced-off corner of a train station. It was massive. The soaring, vaulted glass and iron ceiling spoke of the 19th century. But this was no museum. It was alive. The air was filled with the rumble of trains, the chime of public announcements, and the roar of thousands of voices. I was caked in mud, crystal fragments, and the dried slurry from the node. My clothes were in tatters. My arm was a glowing, alien implement. I looked like a demon who had just crawled out of the floor. A few commuters, rushing for the last train, saw me. They stopped. They stared, their faces a perfect mask of disbelief and fear. I had to get out of sight. I pulled the sleeve of my ruined jacket down over the glowing hand, a pathetically human gesture. It did little to hide the light, but it was all I could do. I walked, head down, toward the nearest exit, a tide of normal people parting around me, giving me a wide berth, whispering. I shoved through a set of heavy wooden doors and out into the night. It was raining. A cold, fine, miserable drizzle. The city was a riot of light, noise, and motion. Black, boxy taxis. Red, double-decker buses. The architecture was a schizophrenic mix of Victorian Gothic and modern steel. I looked up. Across the street, a massive neo-Gothic building of red brick and sandstone loomed, its clock tower glowing against the wet, night sky. A sign, illuminated in white, read, Street Pancras International. Another, on the station I had just exited, read, King's Cross. The node's command had been literal. The transit tube had been immediate. I had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. I was in London. The executive. K-Tech. They were in Ethelberg, staring at an empty hole, their prize, their siphon, destroyed. They had no idea where I was. For the first time, I was ahead of them. But the data in my head was a cold, pressing weight. The Alpha node. The chain is failing. I was a historian in a city I'd only read about, a monster in a world I was trying to save, and the war was 3,500 miles from where it started. I looked at my glowing blue hand. I was the locksmith, and my work was just beginning. Chapter 19. The London Stone. The rain at King's Cross was cold and fine, a miserable, persistent drizzle that instantly soaked through my tattered, filth-caked clothes. I stood under the canopy, a ghost at a banquet. Commuters, bundled in scarves and trench coats, flowed around me like a river parting around a rock. They stared. They whispered. They saw the mud, the blood, and the faint, unmistakable, unholy blue light that pulsed from under my jacket sleeve. I was a monster. I was a beacon. And I was 3,500 miles from home, in the heart of an alien city, with a world to save. My first priority was to disappear. I pulled my arm tight against my body and plunged into a narrow, dark alley between the station and a fast food joint. The smell of wet garbage and old frying oil was a sharp contrast to the sterile, ozone scent of the architect's tunnels. I leaned against the wet brick wall, my breath shuddering. The city was a roar in my ears. The executive was in Ethelberg, yes, but he was a man who commanded a global, shadow empire. He wouldn't be far behind. He would have assets here. And I was a walking flare. I looked at my left hand. I couldn't hide it. The blue light, the pure, steady glow of the rebooted node, was a dead giveaway. It was a part of me now, a tool, but it was also a liability. Control. The thought was a sharp command, born of the same will that had dissolved the bridge. If I was the locksmith, I had to control the lock. I stared at the arm. I focused. I pushed my will into the chitinous plates. Go dark. Go dormant. Hide. The blue light flickered. It resisted. It wanted to be free. It was the energy of containment, and it hated the shadows. Hide. I commanded again, gritting my teeth. Slowly, like a tide receding, the light drew inward. The blue glow faded, sinking beneath the black, chitinous surface. The arm was still a monstrous, inhuman thing, a gauntlet of sculpted, biomechanical armor, but it was dark. It was just a shape, a shadow. Better. I fumbled in my ruined pants. My wallet. It was still there, soaked, warped, but intact. My driver's license. My university ID. A historian from Ethelberg. And my credit cards. This was the gamble. The moment I used one, I was no longer a ghost. I was a ping on a global map. K-Tech would know where I was. The data in my head, the coordinates of the Alpha node, was a pressing, urgent throb. It wasn't a street address. It was a feeling, a psychic magnet. I needed a map. I needed to see London to understand where to go. I had no choice. I was on the clock. The entire network was. I pulled the hood of my tattered jacket up, tucked my monstrous hand into my pocket, and walked back onto the main street. I found what the British called a newsagent, a small 24-hour corner store, its windows bright and humming. I grabbed the first things I saw. A cheap, black, rainproof jacket, a tourist map of London, a pair of thick, black work gloves, a woolen cap, a bottle of water and a pre-made sandwich. I went to the counter. The night clerk, a young man with headphones, didn't look up until I put the items down. He saw my face, my mud-caked, bruised, and exhausted expression, and his eyes widened. He glanced at my left hand, which I kept balled into a fist in my pocket. "Rough night, mate," he asked, his voice wary. "You have no idea," I rasped. I pulled out my American Express, the most trackable card on earth. I slid it into the reader. The machine beeped. Approved. A flare just went up. A digital signal, screaming from this tiny shop in King's Cross, London, straight to K-Tech's data servers in Ethelberg. The executive knew. I didn't wait for a bag. I stuffed the gloves and hat in my new jacket's pockets, grabbed the map, and left, pulling the new coat on over my ruined one. I couldn't go back to the tunnels. Not here. I didn't know the way. I needed a base. A temporary, anonymous sanctuary. Across the street, a sign for a dingy, hourly rate hotel flickered. The Crown. It was perfect. I paid in cash this time, using the last of the damp American dollars from my wallet. The night porter gave me a key and a look of profound disinterest. The room was small, smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach, and had a lock that barely held. I jammed the room's single, rickety chair under the doorknob. Sanctuary. 5 minutes. I tore open the map and spread it on the stained bedspread. The London A to Z. It was a chaotic web of streets, a map far older, far more complex than Ethelberg's simple grid. I closed my eyes. I focused on the throb in my head. The coordinates. The psychic pull of the Alpha node. I opened my eyes and let my human hand, my historian's hand, trace the map. I wasn't reading the street names. I was feeling for the cold. The serpent's vein. My finger landed. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a fortress. It was a single, small, circular notation on the map, on a busy, modern street. Cannon Street. And the label, in small, almost reverent print, the London Stone. Of course. The Alpha. The beginning. The Roman Londinium. The single mysterious, ancient rock of unknown origin, the symbolic heart of the city, encased in a grill, set into the wall of a modern sporting goods store. A joke. A tourist curiosity. It was a lid. It was the capstone of the entire global network. The very first piece the architects had laid. And it was failing. I knew where I had to go. I grabbed the map, shoving it into my new pocket. I put on the woolen cap, pulling it low. I put on the gloves. The left glove stretched, protesting, as it covered the inhuman, chitinous shape of my void arm. But it fit. I was disguised. I was a man in a black coat, a hat, and gloves. Anonymous. Just as I reached for the door, my new senses, the ones given to me by the lock, flared. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A high-frequency, electronic whine, just on the edge of my hearing. The same sound I'd heard in the Ethelberg tunnels. A scanner. I went to the window, pulling the grimy curtain aside a single inch. The street below. The rain. The black taxis. And a new car, a black Range Rover with tinted, polarized windows, gliding to a silent stop across the street. A man in a sharp, dark suit, the same kind of executive I'd seen in the alley in Ethelberg, stepped out. He was holding a device, a scanner, and he was looking right at my hotel. The credit card ping. It hadn't just told them London. It had told them King's Cross. They were here. They were already here. Chapter 20. The Vein and the Underground. The scanner. That high-pitched, electronic whine. It was a scalpel, dissecting the hotel room by room. And it was centered on me. The chair under the doorknob was a child's security blanket. It wouldn't stop them for a second. The K-Tech handler, I'd started to think of him as such, the local man, not the executive from Ethelberg, was standing by his Range Rover, calmly directing the operation. Two more men, dressed in the same sharp, dark suits, got out. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like Wall Street bankers. Bankers who carried suppressed pistols and had no souls. They entered the hotel lobby. I was on the 3rd floor. The window was a possibility. I looked. It was a 40-foot drop into the same narrow, trash-filled alley I had used to hide. I could probably make it, but my new arm, it was strong, but I didn't know if it was invincible. A fall like that would break my human leg, and I'd be a sitting duck. I had to go through. I was a historian of architecture. And this building, the Crown, it was old. Mid-Victorian. The walls were thick, but they were a patchwork of brick, plaster, and time. They had secrets. I pressed my good, human hand against the wall papered with yellowing, floral designs. Nothing. Just plaster and lath. I pressed my left hand against it. The dark, chitinous gauntlet. My senses, the ones from the lock, flared to life. The arm was no longer just a key, it was a scanner itself. I didn't just feel the wall, I saw it. I saw the wooden studs. I saw the electrical wiring, a faint, humming glow. I saw the cast iron plumbing for the next room's bathroom. And I saw it. A hollow, a void. A bricked-up chimney flue. An old, forgotten artery of the building, just as the architect's tunnels were the forgotten arteries of the planet. The men were in the hallway. I heard their footsteps, quiet, professional, stopping at the room next to mine. They were sweeping. I didn't have time for a door. I placed my void hand on the center of the sealed fireplace. I didn't punch. The locksmith didn't need to be so crude. I pushed, focusing my will, the same will that had dissolved the bridge. I didn't want to destroy. I wanted to unmake. The plaster didn't crack. It turned to a soft, crumbling powder. The Victorian-era brickwork behind it, it just shifted. The 200-year-old mortar gave way, dissolving, the bricks loosening as if they were children's blocks. I pulled, and a perfect 3-foot-wide section of the wall came away, silent as a whisper. Behind it, a dark, narrow, soot-caked shaft. I heard the door to the next room burst open. A muffled, clear. They were at my door. I slid the heavy old-fashioned hotel desk in front of the hole I'd made, a last useless line of defense, and slipped into the chimney. The doorknob of my room was blown out. The sound was a deafening crack as the lock splintered. The chair splintered with it. He's in here. Asset is gone. I was climbing, my monstrous arm finding purchase on the rough brick, my human hand scraping, my feet scrambling. The soot was thick, clogging my nose, my lungs. The wall. He's through the wall, a voice shouted from my room. A gunshot. A 9mm slug tore through the hotel desk and sparked against the brick inside the chimney, inches from my foot. I climbed faster, scrambling up into the blackness. The shaft was narrow, but it was a straight shot. I burst out onto the roof of the hotel, a flat, tar-papered expanse slick with cold rain. Alarms from the hotel, a shrill, pulsing whoop, now cut through the night. I was exposed. I ran to the edge of the roof. The K-Tech handler was on the street below, looking up, his cell phone to his ear. He'd already anticipated this. The Range Rover was moving, turning to cut off the block. I ran the other way. I leaped the 4-foot gap to the adjoining building, landing on the roof of a closed curry house. I crossed 2 more roofs, a desperate, scrambling shadow, before I found what I needed, a fire escape. It was old, rusted, and loud, but it took me down, 3 stories in 10 seconds. I landed in another alley, this one opening onto a different street, a main thoroughfare. I was out. I was free. But I was running. I shoved my gloved hands in my pockets, pulled my hat low, and walked. I forced myself to walk. Running made me a target. I was just another face in the late-night London crowd. But where to? King's Cross Street, Pancras Station. The Underground. The Tube. It was a massive, sprawling complex, a city beneath the city. It was my only chance. It was public. It was crowded. And, as my new senses were screaming at me, it was deep. I descended the escalators, joining the river of commuters. I was a ghost, my heart hammering, my new jacket already soaked. I could feel the K-Tech agents spreading out, a dragnet, through the streets above. They knew where I'd been. They could guess where I was going. Cannon Street was a logical destination from King's Cross. They would be watching the tube. I reached the Northern Line platform. Southbound. Toward the city. Toward Cannon Street. The platform was crowded. The air was warm, thick with the smell of brakes and damp wool. The digital sign said 3 minutes until the next train. It was too long. I scanned the faces. Commuters, tourists, students, and him. He was standing by a vending machine. He wore a suit, not a tactical uniform. He was reading a newspaper. But his eyes were not reading. They were scanning. And he had a small, almost invisible earpiece. Another one by the tunnel entrance. A woman, young, in a university sweatshirt, but her stance was all wrong. Too balanced. Too professional. Plainclothes custodians. They were waiting for me. The scanner. They had to have a portable scanner. The one the handler had, it was too big. But a smaller one. The man by the vending machine folded his paper. He began to walk slowly, his path intersecting mine. His hand went to his jacket pocket, where I saw the telltale bulge of a small, handheld device. He was sweeping the crowd. He was 20 feet from me. The sign flashed. 1 minute. I could feel the rumble of the approaching train. The man's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto mine. The device in his pocket must have screamed. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a gun. He just touched his earpiece. Asset acquired. Platform 8. Southbound. Moving to engage. The woman by the tunnel started to move. They were going to box me in. The train's lights appeared in the tunnel. I had no time. I couldn't fight them here. I couldn't let them take me. I needed a distraction. A big one. I looked at the wall. My new, enhanced senses saw it. The glowing, humming heart of the platform's electrical system. A massive, gray junction box, labeled Danger, High Voltage. My Ethelberg move. But this time, I wouldn't detonate it. I would drink it. The K-Tech agent was 10 feet away, his hand now inside his jacket, reaching for his weapon. I turned. I walked to the junction box. I put my gloved, monstrous, hidden left hand on the steel plate. And I inhaled. The hunger. The symbiote. It roared to life. I opened the tap. The electricity didn't just flow into me. I sucked it. The platform lights didn't just flicker. They died. The digital signs went black. The vending machines went silent. The massive, roaring fans in the tunnel spun down. The entire station was plunged into absolute, total, screaming darkness. The train, its own systems failing, hit the emergency brakes. Its wheels locked. It screeched into the station, a 300-ton steel monster, showering the track in sparks, the only light in the cavern. It was chaos. People screamed, fell, panicked. The K-Tech agent was blind. He's here. He's got the power out. All teams, blind. I didn't need light. My arm was now thrumming, supercharged, a dull, blue glow visible even through the glove. The train screeched to a halt, its doors sliding open on emergency battery power. In the pitch-black, spark-filled chaos, I stepped over a fallen suitcase, navigated the screaming crowd, and slipped into the empty, dark car. A second later, the emergency doors hissed shut. A second after that, the train's backup power kicked in. The lights inside my car flickered on. I was alone. The train, lurching, began to move again, pulling out of the blacked-out, chaotic station. I saw the two plainclothes custodians on the platform, silhouetted against the sparks, their weapons drawn, staring helplessly as I slid away into the dark. I was gone. Cannon Street was next. Chapter 21. The Volatile Cargo. The tube car was an island of dim, flickering light, hurtling through an abyss. The chaos of King's Cross was behind me, a fading echo of screams and sparks. I was alone, my breath fogging in the cool, damp air. The train was lurching, its systems crippled, running on just enough emergency power to drag itself to the next station. I was not alone in my own body. My left arm, tucked inside my new glove and jacket, was no longer a cold, dead weight. It was a furnace. The power I had drunk from the King's Cross station, it was too much. It was not the pure, clean, blue energy of the lock. This was raw, human, dirty electricity. It was chaotic, volatile, and it was thrumming under my skin with a white-hot, furious energy. The symbiote, the void part of me, was ecstatic. It was drunk on the power, brimming with it. But I, Owen Hayes, was terrified. I was a walking, unstable bomb. The glove I wore was smoking, the synthetic fibers curling and melting, sticking to the chitinous plates of my hand. I ripped it off, hissing, as the superheated glove tore away. My hand, my arm, was glowing with a blinding white-blue light. It was a live wire. I could feel the power arcing, seeking a ground, and the symbiote was fighting me, begging me to unleash it. We are strong, a thought whispered in my head, a thought that was not mine. We can burn them all. We can end this. No, I growled, my voice a low rasp. I grabbed my supercharged left wrist with my human right hand. It was like grabbing a blast furnace. I felt the skin on my good hand sizzle. I am in control. I am. I was a historian carrying a weapon of mass destruction, and the weapon had a mind of its own. The train, with a groan of tortured metal, began to slow. It was pulling into the next station. I looked at the map, my mind racing. Bank. A massive interchange. One stop from Cannon Street. They would be here. They had to be. They had lost me at King's Cross, but the network was a closed loop. They would have teams at every major stop south. I peered through the grimy window. The platform was bright. The power cut had not affected this station. It was crowded, brightly lit, and crawling. Not with custodians in tactical gear. With suits. Men and women, dressed as bankers, tourists, students. A dozen of them. They were fanned out, their eyes scanning every window of every car as my crippled train slid, sparking, into the station. I ducked my head, pulling my hat low, and shoved my white-hot glowing arm deep into my pocket, praying the jacket lining wouldn't ignite. The train stopped. The doors hissed open. A man in a pinstripe suit, standing just outside my door, saw me. His eyes, cold and dead, widened for a fraction of a second. He saw the smoke curling from my pocket. He saw the faint, white light. He touched his earpiece. He's here. Car 4. He's unstable. He and two others, a woman with a briefcase and a man reading a paper, began to converge on my open door. They weren't just here to capture me. They were here to contain me. They were a bomb squad, and I was the bomb. The man in the pinstripe suit reached into his jacket. Not for a scanner. For a gun. I was trapped. I couldn't fight. Not like this. If I unleashed the power in my arm, the power it was screaming to use, I wouldn't just kill them. I would vaporize this entire platform. I would murder hundreds of innocent commuters. I would become the monster they thought I was. I had to get rid of the power. I had to ground myself. The agents were at the door. Dr. Hayes, do not move. Surrender. I looked down. At the gap between the car and the platform. At the track below. At the third rail. I'm sorry, I whispered. To who? The agents. The city. As the first agent lunged into the car, I didn't fight. I dropped. I threw myself out the door, not onto the platform, but onto the track. I landed hard on the gravel ballast, the impact rattling my teeth. He's on the tracks. Get him. I didn't run. I reached out. I slammed my supercharged, glowing, monstrous left hand directly onto the live, 600-volt third rail. It was not an absorption. It was a discharge. I was dumping the entire electrical load of King's Cross Station back into the London Underground grid. The universe exploded in a flash of white. There was no sound, just a crack that was louder than thunder. The third rail under my hand didn't spark, it disintegrated. It turned to white-hot, molten slag. The train I had just left, its entire electrical system blew. The lights shattered. The metal skin of the car buckled. The bank station platform plunged into a blackness more profound than the first. Every light, every screen, every PA system died. The resulting shockwave threw the K-Tech agents back like dolls. The chaos was absolute. The darkness was total. And I was empty. The glorious, terrible, godlike power was gone. My arm was dark, cold, and hungry again. The symbiote screamed in my mind, a howl of rage and starvation. I almost welcomed it. In the pitch black, in the pandemonium of screaming, blinded commuters, I was the only one who could see. My new, alien senses, though dulled, were still better than theirs. I scrambled from the tracks, up onto the now dark platform, on the opposite side of the train. I ran. I ran past the blinded, disoriented K-Tech agents, a ghost in their self-made nightmare. I found the stairs, took them 3 at a time, and burst out of an emergency exit, into the cold, wet, glorious London night. The city's alarms were blaring, a response to the massive, unexplained power surge I had just fed into its heart. I was at Bank. I was in the ancient, financial heart of the city. The buildings were looming, stone and glass canyons. I looked at the street sign. Cannon Street. I ran, my human legs burning, my ruined glove flapping. I ran past the closed shops, the dark pubs. And then I saw it. It wasn't a fortress. It wasn't a temple. It was a branch of all sports. A brightly lit, modern, sporting goods store. And there, set into the foundation, right next to the automatic sliding glass door, was a small, underwhelming, caged-in block of pockmarked, mossy stone. The London Stone. The Alpha Node. The heart of the entire global lock. I stood there, gasping, rain mixing with the soot and crystal dust on my face. I looked at the shoppers inside, browsing for sneakers and soccer jerseys, completely oblivious to the 2-billion-year-old linchpin of their reality, set into the wall beside them. I reached out my gloved, trembling, starving left hand. I hovered it over the cold, black iron grill. I could feel it. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just old. It was dead. The faint, blue hum of the lock. It was silent. This node wasn't just failing. It was broken. And the faint, psychic scream of the Umbra, seeping through the cracks, was deafening. Chapter 22. The Locksmith and the Stone. I stood in the cold London rain, a ghost at the feast. Inside the Allsports, a young couple was laughing, trying on brightly colored running shoes. They were 10 feet away from the Alpha Node, 10 feet from the dead heart of a 2-billion-year-old planetary prison. The stone was silent. Unlike the Ethelberg Node, which was a living, screaming machine, this was a corpse. The faint, blue energy of the lock was gone, and in its absence, I felt the true enemy. It was a psychic pressure, a cold, insidious seepage. The Umbra. It wasn't loud. It was a patient, cold, suffocating weight, pushing against the weakened barriers of our world. The London Stone was the original seal, the master lock, and it had failed. The chain was broken. My reboot of the Ethelberg Node was a temporary fix, like fixing one link in a chain that was already severed from its anchor. I had to fix this. I had to relight the fire. I looked at my arm. My hungry arm. It was dark, cold, and desperate for a charge. But it was still a key. I stepped forward, ignoring the strange looks from the shoppers inside. I reached out and put my gloved human hand on the cold black iron grill that protected the stone. It was a cheap, modern addition, a piece of civic window dressing. This was the moment. I had no backup. I had no power. I was a historian about to commit an act of public vandalism that would either save the world or get me arrested. I pulled my glove off my left hand. The chitinous, black, monstrous arm was revealed. A woman walking by gasped, pulling her child close. My God! I ignored her. I wrapped my inhuman fingers around the iron bars. Behind me, a car door slammed. Dr. Hayes. I froze. The voice was calm, cultured, and full of a cold, satisfied finality. It was the London handler, the man from the hotel. I turned slowly. The black Range Rover was parked at the curb. He stood by it, flanked by the same two suit-wearing bankers from the hotel. They were not pointing scanners. They were holding suppressed pistols, aimed steadily at my chest. The rain matted their dark hair to their foreheads. You've had a busy night, the handler said, his voice almost conversational. You've cost my associates a great deal. The siphon in Ethelberg. The grid at King's Cross. The entire bank station. You are a remarkably expensive asset, Doctor. Shoppers, sensing the confrontation, were stopping, their phones coming out, filming. This doesn't concern you, I said, my voice low, trying to shield the stone with my body. Oh, but it does, he smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. The executive is displeased, but he is also intrigued. We didn't understand what you were. A thief. A saboteur. But the men in the Ethelberg Node, their last transmission, they said you controlled it. You're not just a key, are you, Doctor? You're an interface. You've bonded with the system. Get out of my way, I said. This node is dead. The Umbra is seeping. Don't you feel it? The handler's smile faltered. He glanced at the stone, and for a second, I saw true primal fear in his eyes. He did feel it. That is why we must take you. We must control the interface. The Umbra must be managed, not repelled. Now, step away from the artifact. Slowly. You don't get it, I whispered, a terrible final clarity settling over me. It's dead. I can't just turn it on. There's no power. Then you will come with us. He raised his pistol. The asset will be secured. He was going to shoot me, here, on Cannon Street. And the lock would remain broken. The Umbra would continue to seep, slowly, patiently, until it had poisoned the whole planet. I had one last, desperate, insane idea. The Ethelberg node. It was rebooted. It was alive. And the transit tube had connected me, fused me, to its energy. The blue light in my arm, it wasn't my power. It was borrowed. I wasn't a battery. I was a vessel. A conduit. I had to give the power of the Ethelberg node to the London node. I had to complete the circuit. But my arm, it was starving. The symbiote, the void part, it wanted to take. It didn't want to give. I looked at the handler. I looked at the stone. I am not an asset, I said. I'm the locksmith. Last chance, doctor. I ignored him. I turned my back on him. It was the ultimate act of faith. Faith in a 2-billion-year-old machine. Fire, he screamed. I didn't wait. I used my monstrous, empty, starving arm. I didn't push. I didn't plead. I tore the iron grill from the wall with a shriek of tortured metal. The first bullet hit me in the back, a high-caliber slug. It tore through my new jacket, through my human flesh. The pain was a blinding, white-hot nova. I fell to my knees, my breath stolen. I heard the screams of the shoppers. I heard the handler yelling, "Subdue him! Get the arm!" I was on my knees, in front of the pockmarked, ancient, dead stone. I was bleeding. I was dying. The symbiote in my arm was screaming. It felt the Umbra, its true master, so close. It wanted to join it. It was fighting me, trying to reach for the stone, to free the shadow. No, I am Owen Hayes. With the last ounce of my will, I fought my own arm. I fought the symbiote. And I slammed my hand, my human hand, against the stone. Nothing. The second bullet hit my shoulder. I collapsed against the wall. The handler was on me, his pistol to my head. It's over. My arm, my left arm, it was free. It was no longer under my control. The starving, void-driven symbiote, it had won. It raised itself, a black, chitinous serpent, ready to strike the stone, ready to break the final seal. This was it. I had failed. And then, thump. A single, slow, heavy pulse. Not from my arm. Not from the stone. From my hip. The key. The original stone I had taken from Sector Gamma. The one that had been silent, inert, dead. It wasn't dead. It was waiting. It was the authorization. The final authorization. It pulsed, and a wave of pure, blue, Ethelberg energy shot into my body. It wasn't a transfusion. It was a command. It overwrote the symbiote. It silenced the hunger. My void arm, now glowing with a brilliant, steady, blue light, stopped, trembling, in midair. It was mine again. The handler stared, his eyes wide in terror at the resurrected light. "You're too late," I whispered. I turned my glowing blue locksmith hand, and I pressed it gently onto the surface of the London stone. It was not a collision. It was a connection. The blue light flowed from my fingers. It was a river of pure architect energy, pouring from me, the conduit, into the dead, cold alpha node. I was the jumper cable. The stone drank. A low, deep OMM began to vibrate from the ground. It was not a sound. It was the planet breathing. The alpha node was waking up. The blue light spread from my hand, tracing ancient, invisible circuits across the face of the stone. The psychic pressure of the Umbra, it didn't just recede. It shattered. It was silenced. The handler, screaming in rage, fired his pistol, emptying the clip into my back. I felt the impacts. I felt my human body dying. But my arm was fusing. The stone was not just taking the energy. It was taking the conduit. The chitinous plates of my hand were merging with the ancient, mossy rock. The stone was absorbing me, making me a permanent part of the lock. I was the locksmith. And now, I was the lock. The world went gray. I saw the handler, his gun empty, staring in disbelief. I saw his men, lowering their weapons, their mission a total failure. They couldn't move me. They couldn't take me. I was part of the foundation of the city. My vision faded. I was no longer Owen Hayes. I was a historian who had become history. I was the secret, buried in plain sight, a silent, eternal guardian, fused to a rock in the wall of a sporting goods store. The chain was whole. The Umbra was contained. And I was at peace.